did see in excess of, I think, from a question that I put in around, there was over 200 certainly haven't had an access an NI check for over 6 months, and that I would imagine most people looking in at the system would raise a concern around that. So it's really just to get a sense of what they're doing to address that. Any views from members? Yeah, right. Peter and then Michelle. Yeah, sorry.
Unless the lady likes to go first.
Oh, you had your hand up first.
Okay. No, look, no issue with that whatsoever, Chair. My understanding, and I might be wrong in this, is access NI is done by DOJ. So I think we probably would want to, if we're writing to EA, we'd want to write to DOJ and just see, are there any outstanding lags in terms of their I've processing in some
I've
way?
Certainly no objection to writing to DOJ. My understanding from engagement with EA officials is that the blockage is back at school level, that they're not making it there in the first place, and that's where the EA, I think, do need to help us understand why that's happening. But I think in terms of due diligence to make sure there's no blockages elsewhere, I would certainly would agree to that. Michelle?
Yeah, no, I agree totally. I think absolutely it's a broader problem, can't get the words out. So there's sports coaches and youth workers as well without the access NI checks as well, so it would be good to get a briefing on that, because I think all it takes is one person really who has an access NI to do something that is dangerous in a school for this to become an even bigger issue. So I don't think we should downplay it at all, so it would be good to get some information in. Also, I have actually asked about the access NI stuff as well, so I think the blockage, as the Chair said, isn't in line with the DOJ. Okay.
Sorry, Deputy Chair, I hadn't seen you.
Just picking up on what you said, Chair, in your discussions with the EA. Are the EA saying that schools are recruiting people into their schools without the access NI check?
Yeah.
And it's the schools themselves who are responsible for this, and probably because it's so difficult to get trained classroom assistants and support workers and so on. I mean, it seems like a serious issue, but it's also one I think that could be easily resolved.
You would have thought so. Yeah,
that's what I would have thought. But.
Yeah, and certainly for my engagement with the EA, because I have tried to understand it and tried to engage with principals as well locally to understand where it's coming from. It does seem that there were potentially, and again, it would be good to get this clearly from the EA. It does seem that potentially there is some space for a temporary window without an access NI, perhaps in an emergency recruitment scenario, but once we're sort of beyond 6 months, I think it would be very hard to justify that as an emergency recruitment scenario. So would be good to get the clarity if members are agreed on both those points. Agreed? Okay. That's fine. So on to item 3, which is declaration of interests. So I just want to put note a declaration. I know that we don't do this every week in terms of boards of governor membership, but I think just around classroom assistant recruitment and also the fact that we have minor capital works, which obviously boards of governors would have a role in terms of engaging with the EA and that. I just wanted to put on record my membership of Killinchy Primary Board of Governors.
I'll do the same, Chair. I'm Board of Governors, St McCartan's Primary School.
Any other indications?
Vice Board of Governors, Grosvenor Grammar and Mitchell House.
No other indication. No, sorry, Colin has indicated there remotely. Apologies, Colin.
No, you're fine, Chair. Just the same Board of Governors in Harville Primary School.
Thank you. Yeah, I know those will all be declared on our registers, but I think just the issues are very specifically related to things that will directly cross over with those rules today, so important to note. Not seen any other indications. If anything arises over the course of the meeting, obviously do indicate. Item 4 is matters arising, and the clerk had just highlighted for us there, it's at page 12 of your table. Papers that came in today is just the press release from the Department of Education regarding the investment in outdoor equipment for schools. I wanted just to speak to that very briefly. I mean, I think probably everybody here was in the chamber for when the initial announcement on that came out. I just wanted to see if committee was content to maybe go back to the department to get a little bit more clarity, because I'm getting some feedback and I don't know if other members are getting the same from principals, and it was referenced in the chamber this week around just a few challenges emerging with that. One particularly on timescales about when this money needs to be spent, and that some principals are finding that challenging. To get some clarity around whether or not the companies approved for procurement via the EA are actually in a position to turn this around in the required timescale. And also I've had principals contacting me who have previously invested quite significantly in their outdoor play, who feel that they don't really know what they're supposed to do with this money, and whether there's any advice around how the money is earmarked and what can be done. So I just wanted to propose that we note it, and obviously no one here is going to do anything other than welcome investment in schools, but there do seem to be some practical considerations arising from this, and I just wondered if members were agreed we get some clarity from the Minister on those. Agreed. Okay, that's fine. Item 5 is draft minutes.
Sorry, before you move on, could I raise a matter as well?
Certainly.
It's in relation to the Minister's evidence a couple of weeks ago here at the committee and around Lisneal, and the Minister has now placed the minutes of that meeting he had himself and Gordon Lyons with Lisneal and with Maiden City FC and staff from Department of Community Sports branch. And I have to say that some of what is noted in this minute maybe contradicts some of the evidence that the Minister gave. So I know you at the outset asked the Minister if he had intervened in this issue, and he said that he hadn't. And that may well be the case, but one of the issues agreed in this minute is that the Education Minister agreed to follow up with EA in relation to the accommodation project, the resurfacing the 3G pitch, and assisting the school to be shovel ready to avail of any future funding opportunities such as your school, your club. Now, I can't understand if the Minister followed through on that action, why he didn't mention it at the committee. There seems to be a lack of transparency there. So perhaps we could get some clarification around that in terms of what communication did he have with the EA.
So just to check, Deputy Chair, is that a proposal to write to the Minister for that, or to raise that with the EA officials today, in terms of what way you'd want to take that forward?
Well, I mean, I think the Minister needs to clarify. I mean, it's a minute from his department. And there was an action point that he was to follow up on. The impression I got after when he gave his evidence a couple of weeks ago was that he had no contact with the EA in regard to the issue of funding for the pitch. It seems from this minute we have that that's not the case. It's also the case that Lisneal also got 1.3 million in minor works funding as well, and it's strange that the Minister wouldn't mention that either. And I just think if you want to be transparent and open, you get everything out on the table, and it seems to be that that's not what happened.
Look, I think it's been very clear the committee has expressed the view that they are interested in openness and transparency on these issues, and that is, I mean, we have a briefing coming before us today really because of that desire to get that openness and transparency clearly on the table on this issue. I have no issue with writing to the Minister to seek clarity on those points. Do any views from other members? David?
I would just say that my recollection, not specifically from the committee briefing, I'd have to look back at that, but certainly between that and the Minister's contributions in the Chamber, was the Minister made clear that actually he has very many meetings with very many schools, and that certainly what I took from it was it's not unusual for him thereafter to forward those issues on to the EA for consideration, but he was making very clear that may I say, unlike the committee, it was not special treatment that was being given to Lisneal in that regard. This is something he does after engagement with any school. So I would just make that point, that this is something that the Minister, I think, and he can speak for himself, but I certainly got the impression he'd done this routinely after meetings. It's not that Lisneal is getting a special service here.
Peter, you'd indicate?
Sure. Well, I've been out on a few ministerial visits to schools in my time, probably in excess of 500. It's absolutely standard for a school principal to walk the Minister around a school and say, that window hasn't been fixed for 3 months, and the Minister will go, I'll contact the EA, and that's absolutely what happens in every school that I'm aware of. It would be completely normal if a principal said to the minister, you know, can you follow up? I don't know where we are in this. In fact, Pat mentioned, you know, the sports program, you know, our school, and again, it'll be standard for information to flow back. You know, if the principal said, "Can you have some more information on that?" Absolutely, we'll get somebody to send that through. That's absolutely standard in every school. So I think what the minister was saying again, from weeks ago, was that he didn't bring any influence to bear on this decision. This was purely EA, and I would be surprised if there weren't sort of informational action points flowing out of any visit by any minister to any school. That's just what happens.
Well, probably to avoid, given the interest of time, to avoid back and forth. I mean, the proposal is that we write to get clarity on what the nature of the contact with the EA is. Have I understood that correctly, Deputy Chair? I'm certainly happy to support that.
I would also like to ask why he didn't mention it when he was in front of committee.
And perhaps also you've referenced the other pot of funding that's now come to light in terms of whether there was any engagement at that meeting or indeed with the EA on that. So, I mean, I'm content those are reasonable proposals. Is there an agreement, or do we have a interest in dividing the committee on this issue?
I don't think we're going to divide the committee, Chair, but I think the committee's fixation continues.
Thank you. So we're agreed on that proposal from the Deputy Chair. So that takes us then to item 5, which is the draft minutes. So there may be a little bit more in this than ordinarily we would, because we have to look at the draft minutes of the committee meeting, which you'll find there from the 12th of February at page 58 in your packs. Because that regrettably ended up becoming an informal meeting because of issues with quorum at that meeting, any actions arising from that we'll have to agree here. So I would want to first of all get members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings from that meeting. Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay, let's get those signed. Okay. And then we have the draft minutes, then sort of the concurrent committee meeting. This is the one where we need to maybe do a little bit more work to just agree on any further actions, and that's at page 66 of your packs, and that's from the 19th of February 2025, last week's concurrent meeting, which became an informal one. So first of all, can I get members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings of that meeting? Are we agreed? Agreed. And then we couldn't agree formally on any actions to be taken, but there were a number of actions that arose from that. So please come in with anything that I miss here, but the clerk has provided a note of a few that we wanted to follow up on. So we have fairly general further information on the SEND delivery plan. I'm not sure that might give the department a lot to go on in terms of what we're asking for. There is a note around the need for a joint education and health workforce plan. So I think that was something that emerged really quite clearly. I think there was probably acceptance between both sets of officials that would be desirable, but it didn't seem to feel deliverable from the evidence that I heard on the day. So I think there was certainly an interest in writing to both respective ministers, health and education, around really some specific detail on what work is being undertaken to move towards joint workforce planning in terms of how we meet those health needs that exist in the education system, particularly in relation to SEN. And I would just add to anything we agree here, I think we're probably to notify the Health Committee of anything that we're doing, just as courtesy on that basis. There was some information raised around a proposed Operation Encompass database, and that we wanted more information on that in terms of what that entailed and how that would be delivered. So,
so not to be confused with the domestic violence in
yes,
schools Encompass.
It was a different
operation,
phrase. Yeah,
it's a all round data.
So to try and understand a little bit what that related to, then there was some specific issues raised about speech and language therapists who could deliver support in Irish, and how many of those are in the system. So I think we asked about getting some numbers on that. And then the old chestnut that we've revisited a number of times around the number of allied health professionals that are available in the system to support with special educational needs. And again, I think it was quite clear from the meeting that there is really doesn't seem to be a clear baseline on that, but I think we should put in writing, even if to note our concern on that and the committee's interest in getting that benchmark and baseline in place, because I'm not really sure how we can plan for SEND services if we don't have that in place. So those, then there was also nursing provision in schools, and I think it was agreed that we would certainly want to notify the Health Minister of this committee's keen interest in that issue, and when the review of the needs profile within special schools and the outworking of that in terms of nursing provision is complete, that the committee would ask to be cited of that immediately, and then we can take forward how we engage with that at that stage. But I would propose we might want to go further and for the committee to note that we will want to express our concern around the withdrawal of nursing provision across the entire school estate, not in one particular trust area, and that the patchwork provision we have doesn't feel fit for purpose, if members are agreed on those actions. Agreed? Okay, that's fine. That is us. We'll move on. So a little bit longer at the start this week than usual. So we'll do our best to try and make up time where we can. So that moves us on to item 6 on the agenda, which is our oral briefing from the Ulster University and Centre for Effective Services, which is to brief the committee on their report on classroom assistance and the research work that they have done in relation to the classroom assistance workforce. So I'd refer members, just while the witnesses are seated, to a briefing note from the clerk at page 71, a copy of the classroom assistance in Northern Ireland report at page 73, and then there's a separate section with some of the infographics from that report at page 142. So you're all very welcome here today. I was really delighted to be able to previously sponsor your event in the building where you presented that research, and I think it was a really great day where we got to look into some of this, really hear from classroom assistants in detail, and then to get a sense of maybe where we need to go to utilise this rule more effectively and perhaps understand the rule as it currently exists in the system. But it's for you to present the evidence today, and we'll hopefully be able to move into a presentation in a moment. So we've got Professor Una O'Connor-Bones with us, Senior Lecturer at the University of Ulster. We have Dr. Caroline Courtney, Research Associate at the University of Ulster, and Magella McCloskey, who is the Director of the Centre for Effective Services. So I think really the best format here would be for you to present anything that you want to the committee in terms of that research report, and we would ask for that to be at least 10 minutes if possible. I know you have a lot of material there that you're keen to get through, and then we'll move to question and answer, and we have a very, very big agenda today, so we'll be looking at 5 minutes per inquiry for each member, so I need everyone to work with me on that today. So I'll hand over to yourselves. Thank you.
So, thanks, Nick. So I'm going to start, and as you said, I'm Magella McCluskey, and I'm Director at the Centre for Effective Services, and I just want to set out very briefly the context for this research. And as you've said, I'm joined by Professor Una O'Connor-Bones, who has a significant track record of research into special education and inclusion, and Dr. Caroline Courtney, who is our data expert on this study. So CES is an all-island intermediary organisation, and our particular role in this research is to support the use of evidence, so to make sure that it doesn't just sit on the page, but is used in the design of policy and in the design of services. And we have a track record of doing that on a number of transformations, both in our Belfast and Dublin office. This research was independently conducted. It follows our joint international scoping review that looked at the deployment of classroom assistance internationally, and is the first time such a very significant data set of the views and perspectives of classroom assistants has been amassed in Northern Ireland, so it's very, very important. So Una is going to take us through the research, and then we'll happily answer your questions.
And as Nick said, there's a lot of messages in it, but I've tried to condense it to one page, if you'll bear with me. So thank you again just for the opportunity to present today. So our starting point for undertaking this research was that getting a sense of who the classroom assistants in Northern Ireland are is both necessary and long overdue. As a pivotal workforce in schools, issues like their role, their deployment and their career development has never been directly explored, so we were very keen to capture their perspectives and their experiences and ensure that those insights are used to inform the SEN reform agenda or certainly contribute to it. As Magella alluded to, we gathered survey responses from almost 1,500 classroom assistants working in mainstream and special schools across Northern Ireland, and that was supplemented with focus group interviews. And for us, that provided a solid, original evidence base from which we could begin to really probe and consider the role of the classroom assistant, and also ask ourselves, what is its function in schools and classrooms of today? The key findings in the report highlight an enduring pattern of inconsistency in the deployment of the classroom assistant role, and it has impacted on multiple aspects of doing their job, not least in relation to their recruitment, the job description, their contractual conditions, their deployment in classrooms, their access to training, and also their options or not for career development. And I think collectively this legacy of confusion and ambiguity has led to kind of a distortion of expectations around the role, and it has also diminished the status of the post. So it's clear from our study that change in and around classroom assistants is overdue. We're also very aware it's an emotive topic. It's always going to be an emotive topic, and it'll involve a shift in hearts and minds across the education system, as well as with parents and pupils. And our findings have also confirmed that there isn't a single solution to resolving the challenges identified by classroom assistants, since many of these are so interconnected. And in our mind then, a cohesive response is vital to ensure that any reform of the classroom assistant workforce has clarity of purpose in its direction and implementation moving forward. As part of the analysis of the findings from the classroom assistant data, we identify a series of intersecting messages which we see as the starting point for a responsive and progressive approach to address some of the core issues that will inform the future of this critical role. And that relates to the areas I mentioned previously, to their job description, to the nature in which they're recruited and deployed, their options to access training, to have career progression and promotion pathways, and also what the role of the classroom assistant itself should be in classrooms of today. We're aware that investment in classroom assistants is one of the key strands in the department's agenda for reform over the next 5 years, and we very much hope that our research will be instrumental in informing or underpinning the fulfilment of this delivery plan, as well as providing a foundation for further necessary research. So thank you very much, Nick, for that opportunity to share the findings.
Thank you. And look, I think it's we get a lot of research presented to us at this committee, and some of it feels timely, and some of it sometimes doesn't feel, and we don't always know as a committee how to handle it. But certainly when this research came in today, came into the committee, it felt like it landed at the right time. I think in terms of the nature of the conversation that we are having in terms of the need for transformation of how we deliver SEND services in particular, of which classroom assistants play such a key role. So it really did feel very timely indeed, and we're delighted to have you here to speak to it in a bit more detail. So the first thing I want, maybe just to get to maybe the issue that I think is, for a lot of classroom assistants, is maybe causing the most concern at the moment, and there are many of them. There are many of them, so maybe don't want to characterise it as definitely a universal picture. But I think when we hear evidence around SEND transformation, one of the issues that comes back repeatedly is that the current model of assigning one-to-one an adult on a one-to-one basis to a child with a statement of special educational needs is not working. That's what we hear from officials, that's what we hear from the EA, that it's not working financially, and it's not the right model of support that we need to look at as standard. I'm not expressing a view on that, that's just feeding back, that's what we are told. And certainly from meeting the classroom assistants at the event when the research launched, I wouldn't say there was a unified opinion on that. So I suppose I really wanted to get a sense from looking at engaging with classroom assistants in detail. Do you have a view on whether or not that model of support is still one that we would likely see in terms of the classroom assistant role, and is there any research or best practice around that would help us understand whether the one-to-one classroom assistant model is one that we would want to factor into our ongoing SEND services?
I think going back to what I said previously, there isn't going to be one single solution that suits the needs of every child, because ultimately the child will be at the heart of the SEN transformation process. I think for some children, perhaps those with the more diverse, more complex, more profound needs, there may be instances where one-to-one support is appropriate. But I think there is general consensus, both from classroom assistants, from the international research evidence, from teachers, from classroom assistants themselves, that the one-to-one model is perhaps no longer sustainable in its current form. We do have the issue, if we look at the findings from the report, of almost the over-recruitment of classroom assistants, where they, to use the quote of one classroom assistant, they were literally pulling people in off the streets to meet this need, and that it really wasn't a satisfactory option on multiple levels, not least having maybe 4, 5, 6 classroom assistants in a classroom with a teacher, where maybe the ambiguity and the confusion around roles and responsibilities and deployment can become even more conflated. So I think for us, our starting point today, I suppose, and really the message from our report, is that further research is definitely needed. We know that there are potential alternative deployment models, either through models that currently exist or looking at alternative options, and that would tie in, this is where the interconnectedness comes in, that would tie into perhaps training options for classroom assistants to upskill a workforce in a different way, from considering, as you mentioned previously, Nick, what role allied health assistants have in this, to the role of newly qualified teachers. So I think it's important not to identify that there's a single solution, but perhaps there are a portfolio of options, but certainly ones that need to be explored on their own merit, perhaps piloted if needs be, because every school will be different, every set of circumstances of a school will be different, and schools might prefer some autonomy in terms of what is the best combination of a workforce that works for the needs of the children in our school at this moment in time, but that there is the access then to that skill set and that qualified workforce in order to meet it.
In many ways, it's a workforce that has evolved on quite an ad hoc basis,
Yes.
and that perhaps there is a sense that the job descriptions maybe just don't match the reality, and that came through from your report. In terms of that need to review the job descriptions, then, I mean, we're post-pay and grading review, and I would hope that we don't meet resistance from the EA, because almost I would worry there'd be a sense that work's been done. But a clear recommendation that seems to come through here is that we need to look at how we define these rules, and if that means jobs need to be reevaluated, renamed, and training pathways and career progression needs to be developed, that is what we need to be looking at. So in terms of an action arising from that, if we were going to be following this up as a committee with the EA in particular, would you say that the review of the job descriptions and a job evaluation exercise around that would be an obvious action arising from the report?
I think so, but again, when you're thinking about the review of the job description, I do still come back to this: what do we want a classroom assistant to be in classrooms of the 21st century? It's not the job that it was 5 years ago, even let alone 10 years ago. So when we're looking at the review of the job description, it's also asking those questions: what qualifications might we like a classroom assistant to have? There's an awful lot of research. Classroom assistants, the generic entry point is the level 3 childcare qualification, which is grand and it has served a purpose. But we've looked at other jurisdictions where perhaps a more education-focused qualification is perhaps a better option, so that classroom assistants are coming into their post with maybe a more grounded understanding of education, of curriculum, of pedagogy, that gives them a firmer footing almost in classrooms. So the review of the job description implies several layers of qualifications, what kind of options for training are there, in a way that leads to a skilled and informed workforce who can actually deliver what schools and what classrooms and what children need in a more meaningful way, but also has created a skill set for the classroom assistants that allows them to see this as a career pathway, as an actual professional pathway, rather than the kind of feeling that they're just being added in to fill a gap at the moment.
So to be clear then, there's no suggestion that we need to look at what classroom assistants are doing and reevaluate the jobs to make sure that it reflects the tasks they're doing. We need to go back a step to what is it we want them to do. What is the purpose of this role across the whole education system, not just SEN, because I think we need to be clear, it's not just SEN. There's a really vital role in foundation stage as well, which I think has maybe been diluted a little bit by some of the focus on SEN. So it's really that's the work that needs to be taken forward from your perspective.
Yeah.
It's the what do we want these particular staff members to do in the education system.
It's also a way, it's also a way of, we've ended up with a workforce who are very demotivated and very disincentivised, but to present it and to repackage it as a role that actually is an attractive job option for some people, is an attractive job option in terms of I know exactly what I'm doing and I feel trained and qualified enough to do it, but I also have a career rather than I'm just in to, to fill a gap, which is what it feels like to a lot of classroom assistants.
Some of them mentioned that they wanted to be professionalised.
Yeah.
They felt that their role needed to be professionalised.
And it's to do about status and feeling valued in the school, that rather than you've just been brought in. So having that kind of status that goes with having a professional recognition of what we do in schools was something that mattered a lot.
So the outcomes for our children is a jigsaw puzzle, and a number of different players are really critical to that. The teacher, the parent, the home life, and the classroom assistant. So it's about the interplay of all of those professionals, I think, and then figuring out specifically what it is that we want our classroom assistants to do. And that will vary according to the needs of our children and young people that are going through the education system.
And we very much saw that as it's a process related approach, but it has to be one best practice, I suppose, is co-design. So it's something that is co-designed with classroom assistants themselves, but also with teachers, with SENCOs, with principals, in order to everybody's really, really clear who is this workforce and what do we want them to be and what do we want them to provide. And that way you're getting that trust and that buy-in into a new system that to demonstrate that it does work and that it can work very effectively, because it has to be seen as a win-win, I think, for everybody involved in the equation, not least the children that are at the centre of it.
One of the things that was raised with me, and I'll finish on this, was just an educational psychologist that I spoke to at the event when we were when you launched the research, was that they were very clear that on the occasions when they make a recommendation for a one-to-one classroom assistant, that they make that recommendation with the expectation that their professional judgment will be taken into account on that, and that they were just wary of a system where we would say that's not something that's going to happen anymore. So it's just to be clear, what you're saying from the research is that this will be a mixed approach in terms of how we utilise this workforce going forward.
But I think the review of the workforce in terms of what is the best way forward and what evidence base can we use to inform the best way forward has to be the starting point, definitely.
Well, that's wonderful. I'll bring the Deputy Chair in, and then if other members want to indicate.
Thanks for coming along, and thanks for this report. It's very useful and informative. On to your findings, one of the headings was recruitment and employment. And I want to sort of set that in the context of the recent pay and grading review, because we have had contact with a number of classroom assistants who have complained about the derisory increase in their wages. You're talking, one classroom assistant told us she was getting a raise of 19 pence an hour on an already low salary to begin with. And, we all know that classroom assistants are indispensable in the education system. How could the system cope if they weren't there? Yet being treated in this way must be affecting morale within and among classroom assistants. And I'm just wondering, what you would have to say about this recent pay offer and what impact it's having on classroom assistants.
Well, we can only talk to the evidence that we have in terms of the feedback that we received. I mean, the contractual issue was probably one of the biggest areas of dissatisfaction amongst the classroom assistants, because the pay was a major issue, but maybe the different contracts in which classroom assistants were on seemed to have a knock-on effect on pay and salary as well. And you're right. The notion of being paid very, very little for a very important, very responsible role with the level of I suppose stress that it brings as well was something that they were very dissatisfied of. Part of that also, it goes back to the previous comment about the recruitment process, was you would perhaps have classroom assistants who had 10, 15 years experience were being paid 10p more than someone who was brought in with no qualifications or experience at all. So it's multi-layered, I would say, but the issue of salary was probably the one, along with career pathway, was the two biggest issues of areas of dissatisfaction expressed by the classroom assistants in the
Certainly
finding.
the lack of distinction in pay rates was
Yeah.
a major issue that relates to the career pathway. And, you know, I've been here so long, I've got all of these qualifications, and they've just hired somebody who's paid the same as me. And it's definitely an area of frustration.
And in your own research, did you find that salary and pay levels were having an impact, one, on recruitment, but probably more particularly on retention?
Yeah. And the not being paid during the summer as well was one issue that they mentioned in regard to retention. You know, I can't survive if I'm not working all summer, and then I have to leave the job. And people did give examples, I'm leaving because I can't do it.
Or I've got 2 jobs.
Yeah, or I've got 2 jobs.
But I think, you know, the irony is, I wouldn't have doubted for one second the commitment of the classroom assistants that we talked to, because our job, our salary is woeful, but we actually do love our work, and we are genuinely committed to the children. So for them, it was a very, you know, it was a tough choice in many instances. But their commitment was there. But I think they would have acknowledged, for, you know, maybe a classroom assistant that had been in post 10, 15 years, I'm happy to stay where I am. But it was more the incoming, like younger classroom assistants having, you know, how can you make this an attractive career for people? You're not selling it to them at the moment. If you know you're going to come in and this is, you know, you're either on a, you know, a part-time contract, or you are going to be paid a wage that would be less than if I went and got a job in a supermarket. So it was how and again, it goes back to the whole notion of professionalising
And it was also disincentivizing them
Yeah.
for investing in training, because
Yeah,
a
why
lot of
would
the
I train?
external training was self-funded, and they were saying, why would I get this? It's not going to mean anything to the school, and it's not incentivising them to even invest in their career development.
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. So Michelle next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming in. I was at your event, and it's an excellent piece of research and really valuable, I think, for us to have this. Loads to ask. I'm going to pick up on the promotion pathway stuff that you've talked about. I just want to get a feel from you about how you think that could work, and what would be the best way to implement that so that you start to build in that professionalism and getting the uplifts in salary and things like that that people have earned.
We, again, it was stepping back and looking at the international evidence and seeing what happens elsewhere. If we went back, everything I do keeps coming back to if we had the role evaluated, we had the system in place. It's looking at other models. So, for example, we know that there is the higher level teaching assistant post in England, which allows classroom assistants to work towards, you know, based on a set of competences, which allows them to work towards promotion, which allows them to skill up in a way that, you know, that gives them a certain specialism and expertise, perhaps, to take on a pedagogic role under the supervision of the teacher. But it does show that there is a career pathway there for those classroom assistants who would like to progress that way. We also looked within the health profession, because I know from research I did previously within the special schools, the allied health assistants do have a promotion pathway for that they're able to apply to every 2 years or so, which allows allied health assistants to acquire a skill set and an expertise and work their way up. So again, there's elements of professionalisation that do exist. That merit further investigation and that definitely merit some consideration of what would a similar model look like here against a new classroom assistant model.
And if I could just add, I was interested to hear your comments about the social care workforce, or the inquiry that you're having with health. For me, having supported reform in social care in Northern Ireland, I think there are really significant parallels with the social care workforce. And I know the department launched a social care workforce strategy in December. So I think there are lessons to be learned there about setting standards, qualifications, even registering people who are delivering this role that could be beneficial going forward, as well as a qualifications framework.
I think that something like a professional body would have any kind of merit. I know this has been raised in the context of like some of the early years stuff in terms of very similar parallels in terms of professionalising, that they would have a professional body that would kind of oversee and manage a lot of this on behalf of the
could
early
be
years, but classroom assistants, I know if that's something that has been given thought or consideration, whether there's even merit in something like that.
There could be merit in consideration. in tandem with agreeing the role, agreeing the role and the deployment of classroom assistants. That could be helpful. But certainly there are parallels and lessons to be learnt, I think, from other reforms, other transformations that could be useful.
I think you also touched on there, it links into this, was you mentioned the higher level teaching post and people coming in and teaching under supervision of a teacher, but in your report it says that quite a high percentage of classroom assistants are delivering lessons. I'm assuming that's not in supervision, or are they being supervised? Are they doing that when the teacher's not available? Do you know what the scenario is? Or I think it's like 16% of classroom assistants delivered lessons frequently. And did they get paid for that?
We didn't specifically ask them to elaborate on those roles, but certainly in some there were different classroom assistants. Some of them might be taking pupils aside to teach them, or some of them there were instances of the teachers not there and there's nobody else to take the class. So I think it varies.
And it seemed to be kind of almost a reactive response to a situation in a school where some of the classroom assistants indicated there was no sub cover. So we took the class. There was, we weren't able to have a teacher, and the teacher was sick with short notice. Or also, as Caroline said, sometimes children being withdrawn to provide teaching support. Now, with the higher level teaching assistant, for example, there would have been a certain number of competences required to achieve that role. But the guidance around the higher level teaching assistant has always been very explicit that kind of pedagogical support, if you like, can be provided to children by a HLTA, but under the supervision or under the direction of the teacher. So it's not an ad hoc approach. It's not something that's done, informally. That there is a structure and there is a process for it.
And are you aware that if someone who's a classroom assistant and there's no sub takes on the role of a class, do they get paid for that, or are they just doing that out of goodwill?
Certainly there was some frustrations voiced around the fact that if a substitute teacher comes in, maybe just a newly qualified teacher, that they're running, the classroom assistant has to take on the leadership role in the class, and they're not getting paid. We can maybe assume from that they're not. But we didn't ask them specifically. But
I think it's why it feeds into that sense of frustration and demotivation of, why am I doing all of this, or I'm doing all of this, and I'm still, I still don't have a professional status. I'm still not, recognised for the range of duties I'm delivering, and it's feeding that ambiguity around the role also.
Time's just beating us on that. So, Danny, you were next there.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. It's a very, very good piece of work, and very timely, as the Chair said. Have you had any consultation with the Minister or any of the officials around the SEND transformation plan that they released a couple of weeks back?
No, we were in touch with the Minister before the launch of the report, and we had a conversation with him there. We are going to meet with the Department of Education colleagues on Friday, so we'll maybe have a bit more clarity maybe in terms of what contribution perhaps we could make in terms of contributing to the rollout of the transformation.
I think that'd be very important. You said that co-design, that parental engagement. And of course our classroom assistants play a huge role in our schools, particularly now that so many children who are being probably displaced in our schools because we don't have enough specialised schools. And we have the SPIMS, a lot of new SPIMS this year, and I suppose that's a major concern for any classroom assistants that I've been speaking to, that some of the commentary around, look, it sounds great to say we'll provide pathways or we'll give the school that flexibility around their budget. What does that mean for some of our classroom assistants? And I'm sure you're picking that up as well. Some are worried about their jobs as well and all of this.
So I would just comment slightly more broadly, Danny, that a transformation agenda of this nature, the international evidence now shows how important trust is when you're implementing change like this. And that trust needs to come right through the system, from parents and children being trusted, classroom assistants feeling that they're trusting the change, school leaders, the education authority and the department. That relationship of trust is really critical to effective implementation of change. And I think we need to see this agenda being rolled out in a way that builds trust and that allows the voice of classroom assistants and parents and children, as well as the evidence that's been amassed here and internationally, to be really well used. And also that we then take this forward in a way that builds our own evidence base, that we identify what are the outcomes or the indicators of change that we want to see for our children and young people? How are we going to measure that? And in 10 years' time, when the next crowd of experts are coming in, that they have an evidence base that they can talk to you about that actually shows that our children and young people's outcomes have been improved by the next round of special education provision in schools. That's the difference we want to see.
Yeah, and you're right, trust is so important in this, but also making the right decisions and making sure then that the likes of this evidence is actually used. And that's the key and important part in all of this. And you know, it's good you're meeting on Friday. I don't know why you weren't meeting with them long before that there, but you know, that's their journey they're going to have to take with us, and we will be watching the scrutinies. That's our job. I suppose the other wee concern I have around all of it would be then the statement process as well. So many parents have to fight to even get a statement. And again, it falls into that trust. You know, it sounds good to say no child should have a statement to get an educational outcome, but unfortunately that's where we're at. And I just wondered, is that a view that you are hearing through classroom systems, worrying about that commentary as well, at the possibility that we won't even have a statement process?
It wouldn't have come up with conversations, no, Danny, but I think when, you know, going back to the trust, having the evidence base is one thing, but anything that's rolled out, there has to be that kind of process of monitor, review, evaluation, because without the data to stand over it, I mean, a lot of what we said in the report, there was very strong anecdotal evidence there, but there was nothing quantifiable that you could actually stand over. So our report confirmed what a lot of people already knew, but it has provided an evidence base. It's provided a quantifiable evidence base, which we didn't have before. So I think in building the trust in using evidence to inform what happens next, it's that you also are seen to follow through with it. Well, you know, what indicators do we need to develop perhaps that we can monitor this in a meaningful way, evaluate it, review it as needs be, and make changes if it's clear that something isn't working. What do we need to do to make it work differently?
Yeah, no, 100%, completely agree. Thank you.
Danny. Colin, online, if you're able to come in, you'd indicated.
Thanks, Chair, and can I thank the panel for their presentation today and for the work they've put into the research. Just picking up on the executive summary findings on page 4, and to be honest with you, I'm not surprised, but it is really disheartening to hear that many of the classroom assistants feel undermined and undervalued for a range of reasons, and the report states some of them. Can I ask the panel, what do you feel can be done in the immediate or short term to address some of these concerns?
In terms of feeling undermined and...
Undermined and undervalued, yeah.
One, it's maybe a very glaringly obvious answer to begin with, but probably the most important thing we did at the launch was that we made sure the classroom assistants were there themselves. Yeah. Classroom assistants, even in the previous, the independent review of SEN, the NICI review, which were both incredibly important, very valuable reports, included observations on classroom assistants, but they were from teachers or from educational psychologists. So I think actually providing a voice for classroom assistants has probably been the most important thing that we've done in our research, because the number of times we heard nobody has ever asked us what it's like for us, nobody has ever asked us what our experience is, and getting that direct evidence base, getting that direct voice from the classroom assistants gives a validity, I suppose, and a rigour to what we have done, because it's their experiences, their perspectives. So I think positioning them, if you like, as a contributory and a necessary and a vital part of the whole SEN reform agenda is probably, you know, a huge incentive to them, and it's a huge boost to them, because it's actually recognising you have a role and you have a contribution to make in terms of the reform agenda. So that and provides reassurances also that their voice is going to be heard and that they do have a contribution to make. So I think for us that was a very, very important starting point, and saying you're part of the process.
No, thank you. That's really important. And then the second question, if I can, is just touching on the qualifications and experiences for appointments on page 17. And 46 of respondents did not have to have any previous experience before they were appointed. Do you believe the trend of hiring classroom assistants without that prior experience could have any long-term effects on the education system here in Northern Ireland?
Well, the hiring without qualifications, I think that's symptomatic of the pressures that are in the system at the minute, where schools feel that imperative to we need to recruit classroom assistants, and so there's been some slippage in terms of perhaps the expectations for qualifications whenever they were recruiting classroom assistants, and certainly our data also showed, that it has been a more recent trend, if you like, because classroom assistants who had been in post maybe 5, 10, 15 years were more likely to be qualified than the more recent hires. So I think it's not possible to separate it from those pressures that are in the system at the moment, and it's symptomatic of that. But it goes back again to then saying, well, what qualifications would we like classroom assistants have to make sure that anybody that is appointed moving forward, this is the baseline qualification that everyone must have.
No, thank you very much, ladies, and thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Colin, Peter, I'll bring you in next, you indicated.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming along this afternoon and sharing a really excellent report, I have to say. We've had lots of them over my time in the committee, and that's definitely one of the best ones, not least because it's readable. Not all the ones we see are, and understandable. So, look, well done. Some really interesting aspects to it. I'm going to take you to page 56, implications for SEN review and reform, key messages, and just read out a small part of that, which says, it is clear from the study that change is overdue, and that any process of transformation of the classroom assistant workforce will necessarily involve a shift in hearts and minds across all strata of the education system, as well as with parents and pupils themselves. What's the key changes? Because if there's any specifics, we've talked in very broad brush terms so far, but what do you think are the key things in terms of that shift in hearts and minds across education and parents and perhaps pupils as well?
We think that parents need to really trust the changes that are taking place, and for them to do that, those changes need to be evidence-based. There needs to be a good evidence base for why those are being made, and then they really need to be the alternative, if there are alternatives, need to be well implemented and monitored and reviewed, so that we're seeing that those are actually taking place. I think that's one way to start building that trust.
And I think having very open and very transparent conversations to demonstrate that, because as I said earlier, it is a hugely emotive issue. It always has been, and for parents to feel that reassurance that their voice has been heard, that they're maybe part of the process moving forward, because we talk about that kind of top-down, bottom-up approach to policy making, where my perspective, my opinion, my contribution matters as much as anything from on high. So beginning to build those dialogues and those kind of trusted relationships is, I think, integral to the starting point moving forward.
And in terms of the evidence, it's really, really clear from the report that change is required. In terms of particularly on the SEN review message, is the research clear on, because we need to keep the child at the heart of it. So if we think of what is best for the child, that child with special educational needs, is the research clear that actually one-on-one support, which is what we have, is not necessarily the best for any particular child, and there could be other interventions and support given that doesn't rely on that one-on-one support?
I think that our scoping review, we looked at these sort of deployment models, and while some papers did sort of point out advantages, more of them pointed out limitations to that, but also ways of making one-to-one better. So I think really the research to date would be inconclusive on that, but there definitely are limitations and room for improvement.
And just to add the point that Una made earlier, that the multitude of adults that can end up in a classroom can have a wider impact that's not completely known.
There's clear evidence that sometimes there are maybe 6, 7, 8 classroom assistants in one class, and I suppose my question and the driver behind it was, that's quite a bit of resource. Is that the best for the children in that classroom. So I sort of interrupted you there, Jill. I don't know you want to follow
No,
up.
finished making my point. But
I think it's also, as Caroline mentioned, any of the studies that have looked at that kind of impact of one-to-one support have generally been inconclusive, because it's difficult to separate what impact has a classroom assistant had versus all the other factors that are happening in a classroom. And a lot of the research that has been done so far has been maybe observational, or it has been like time and motion studies of looking at how often a classroom assistant interacts with a pupil. And even the researchers themselves would say, it is inconclusive, because you have to factor in all those other confounding variables that might be sitting, that's also affecting how that child has got on in a particular day. So any kind of approach to consider that, I don't even sure that I like the word impact of classroom assistants. It's more starting now, what contribution are classroom assistants making? And if we're taking a whole child approach, it's the holistic approach. It's not just to their academic attainment, it's to their social well-being, their mental well-being, their emotional well-being, their ability to self-regulate. It's what contribution is that classroom assistant making on multiple levels, and then define perhaps the indicators or the metrics that you might need. Well, how could we monitor and review that on a regular basis to show that this particular approach is working?
Everyone's keeping the time brilliantly today. I don't know what's wrong with everybody. I've not heard any other indications. So, Kathy, that's it. I think Cara had indicated, and then I'll bring you in, Kathy. So.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much to our panel. And I'd just like to echo other comments here today. This was an exceptional piece of research, and even just the way it was visually presented, the infographics, everything about it, like it really struck me. 96% of staff who are classroom assistants are female. There's a really a gendered aspect to this as well. And I know that the woman I've spoken with, they just feel completely not motivated at all, overlooked, underpaid, and just not listened to. And that really resonates with the kind of commentary that's in this piece of research. I just have two questions. One of them is around, you had talked about, you do look at an all island sort of basis. I'm wondering, is there anything that you've seen that is happening in the South, or even internationally, when it comes to classroom assistance, that you see that is being done right, and maybe we could implement some of those techniques or support mechanisms here?
No, I was going to suggest that we maybe refer to the international scoping review.
Yeah, but also, I mean, if we were to pick particular things, Cara, when it came to, for example, looking at the qualifications, what might the qualifications look like? We did look at other jurisdictions and regions, and what came across there was that underpinning educational qualification. So, for example, in Australia, what their classroom assistants or teacher aides, they would be required to obtain what would be a nationally recognised qualification in school-based education support. That was the term that was given to it. Whereas in somewhere like Canada, there were qualifications which required the completion of a programme in teaching assistance, or what they called educational assistance. So there was a fundamental education component as opposed to a care component attached to the qualifications. And we know that in the South, for example, there had been a call from the union Forza to upskill their SNA, their special needs assistants, by raising the qualification level from a level 3 to a level 6. And that would become a mandatory criterion for schools who wanted to employ SNAs. Now, that hasn't been implemented yet, but I think we can see that other regions are actually looking at again, asking themselves probably, what do we want our teaching aides or teaching assistants to do, and what do we want them to provide, and how might we best go about doing that in a meaningful way that will benefit the children, but also then the role of the classroom assistant themselves.
Brilliant, that's so helpful, thank you. Because I had been on the picket lines with different classroom assistants, and I know other members have touched on pay, and thank you for your answers on that as well, because I really think in order to feel valued, they need to see an income that demonstrates just how much effort that they put into the jobs that they do and love doing. I think we'd be lost without classroom assistants, to be honest. Just my last question then is, one of the things I keep hearing time and time again from both classroom assistants and principals is the struggle with abuse that they take, predominantly physical abuse, going home with things like black eyes. Is that something you've heard a lot of in your time when conducting this research? And just in your opinion, I suppose, what do you think we can do to better support our classroom assistants in these instances?
I think certainly it came across, the violence in schools definitely came across in the data. And one of the things that classroom assistants point out is that sometimes they're not supported by the school. So I think that from their perspective, definitely supports in schools for that is something that they would have looked for.
And behaviour management is probably, I would say, for teachers as much as classroom assistants, behaviour management is probably one of the biggest challenges for lots of schools at the moment. So it goes back to that training and professional development, those CPD opportunities, which both whether you're a SENCO, a teacher or a classroom assistant, can access to feel that you have the confidence and the knowledge and the skills to deploy those behaviour interventions, let's say, in a safe and an appropriate way. And our preference would be that it was some kind of collaborative or cooperative approach, because for a teacher and a classroom assistant to be trained together doesn't really happen all that often, but yet that kind of cooperative approach to training could make a huge difference to what happens in schools, not just in relation to behaviour management, but maybe just in terms of supporting particular needs of certain pupils. So that kind of collaborative approach would probably be the preferred one. But it's underneath it is that kind of real pressure on sort of how can we access the CPD that will help us manage this in a way that protects the staff, protects the children, protects other children in the school also.
Thank you so much, and that answers my question very well. And just thank you for this piece of research that you've conducted and highlighting there about the school holidays not being covered. Like, you can see why people just have a reluctance to go into this really important career choice. So no, that answers my question. Thank you all very much for being here, and thank you for this important research.
Thank you, Cara. Just before I bring Kathy in, I just wanted to pick up on just something leading on from that and just ask just very, very quickly, just for a quick view. You obviously spoke to a lot of classroom assistants, including those in special schools. One of the things that came up last week at our joint session with health that we had was around some of those particular challenges. Nurses are being withdrawn and classroom assistants are often being asked to perform really quite complex clinical tasks. And one of the things that came up in the discussion from the health officials was around maybe their need in those particular settings where the medical needs are quite clear for a new role, an entirely new role that is some sort of interface between health and education. So someone with some level of clinical training and with an educational role as well. Very quickly, is that something from your research that you feel would merit further consideration?
I think it certainly merits further consideration. We did identify as one of our key findings, again, recognising that every school context is different, that and given schools that kind of autonomy to decide what support does our school need at this moment in time for our group of children, that it might not be a classroom assistant, it might be an allied health assistant. And I know that certainly within the DE recommendations there was that kind of thought that might maybe a hybrid role, which is a bit of both, is also an option. And I think having that kind of portfolio of options is something that would be of great benefit to schools, because it might be this year we need that health education person, or next year we need that allied health person, this year we need the classroom assistant. So I think knowing, and again it goes back to the element of trust and having that reassurance, there are options here, and my school might need a different combination than your school, but we know that those roles and those opportunities exist.
I mean, after the session, I ended up on Friday visiting Glenveigh Special School, and I was absolutely bowled over by the level of medical intervention that classroom assistants were carrying out routinely every day. I mean, it was, I was surprised, and I've been in other special schools, but just really the complexity of medical needs that we're asking really the lowest paid workers in our education service to deliver it was certainly an eye-opener for me. So that's something we can certainly take away. Kathy, I'll just bring you.
You didn't need to rush, Chair, that was my question. No, just following on from that and in agreement with what the Chair said, it was Majella, whenever you mentioned there about the social care and that working together in a previous answer, it took me back to a conversation I'd had with a classroom assistant who had actually asked me for a copy of your report after the launch here. She'd seen it on my social media, but it was, yes, the pay and the not feeling, they're not feeling valued in the work that they're doing, but actually the fear that she goes into work with every day, because she is administering really complex medical interventions. Some of it actually is life-saving, interventions, and yes, about the pay and stuff like that, but it was more the responsibility that was on their shoulders. And how they didn't feel adequately trained, but there's no way that they would let that child not be able to come to school and not receive that medical intervention. So look, it was along the same vein as the chair, and you answered it there, in that kind of joint role that there needs to be. But is that something that's coming up in your research?
It's certainly come up with some of our classroom assistants, who would have had that concern and that worry that I am being asked, to change things or to, operate a particular piece of equipment, and I'm not sure that I should be doing it or that I have the requisite experience to do it. But again, they are there for the children, so they want to do it. So, but there was a certain amount of concern about that, and it's not even my quote; it's a colleague's quote who always used to talk about, the most vulnerable adult in the classroom is actually working with the most vulnerable child in the classroom, and there's a slight imbalance there, and I think that sort of is what really underpinned. We need to look at this particular workforce. We need to, get to grips with this particular topic in this particular area, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
But it seems like there is a moment now for us to move forward, and hopefully this evidence will contribute to progress and better outcomes for our children and our classroom assistants.
We'll be agreeing some actions on the back of this. I imagine how this factors into the SEN transformation agenda will be one of them we'll be raising. David, you'd asked just to come in quickly.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, it's just a quick one. Both the Chair and Peter probably picked up on a number of the points that I had marked out to raise questions around. But could I ask, this first of all, very good piece of work, and like Michelle was at the event, but as I recall, there's a few votes that day, and we were up and down. So it's good to have you here today. It's obviously a very specific piece of work in terms of, and much needed in terms of talking to classroom assistants, how they envisage their role, their experiences, and so on. That's all very valuable. Have you done any work, or is there any work envisaged in terms of teachers, head teachers, other parts of the system, and how they envisage both the current role, weaknesses and strengths of the classroom assistant role, and how they envisage the future in that regard?
That would be our suggestion for further research, because it has to be kind of a progressive agenda almost.
Yes.
And even if we were to even as a starting point, look at like, what do we want this role to be? It has to be something that involves all those relevant stakeholders, whether it's principals, SENCO, teacher, classroom assistants themselves, but also parents and pupils, so that you're getting as informed, as informed and evidence based, if you like, to be able to say, right, we're in agreement what we want this role to be, we're in agreement what the qualifications for this role must be, we're in agreement what kind of roles and duties they might do, but it has to be done as a collective, and it has to be done with that trust inbuilt to it. And it just provides all those reassurances the whole way along the development system.
No, I appreciate it. Just from my own experience going to school and so on, I've not had head teachers or anything ever say to me, the one-to-one role we could do without that. Thank you very much. But there is, as Peter outlined, where there is that abundance in a classroom or whatever, there is times they're saying, I think that could be done slightly better, or I think there's if you had more professional roles, how could we look at doing that, and how do we make that sustainable long term? So appreciate that, and I think that's definitely a piece of work to look forward to in the future. Thanks, Chair.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your evidence today. It's been really helpful, and I think as everyone has really emphasised, it definitely feels timely. So we'll pick up probably from here in terms of actions going forward, and may well hear from you in the future again as some of maybe the research progresses. So thank you all again.
Thank you.
So just while the witnesses make their way out, probably a couple of things that occur to me in terms of where we might want to go in terms of actions, but happy to hear from other members. I would want to suggest as a very straightforward recommendation that we could take forward, perhaps on the back of Danny's question, was to write to the Minister to just ask for his assessment of the recommendations in the research and what aspects of them the Department and EA would potentially be taking forward, saying transformation, if members are agreed on that. And then I thought maybe to get into it in a bit more detail would be to seek a briefing from the EA, in particular around is there going to be work done now to really look at this role for completely from scratch effectively. What do we actually require classroom assistants to do in the system, and what are the different roles that would deliver that? My sense is that there is some work and train on that, and I think it would be good for the committee to get ahead of that and find out exactly where that's at. I'm really struck by the emphasis on trust the whole way through that briefing that if the people involved in delivering these rules don't trust the process of transformation, it's not going to be effective. So I think it's important for us to understand exactly what that process looks like at the moment. So if members are agreed on that, unless there's any other suggestions. No? Okay, well, Michelle?
Wondering, we did talk quite a lot about the one-to-one support in terms of classroom assistance. Is it worth hearing directly from Ed Sykes on that? Because they obviously have a role to play in terms of doing the statements that make that recommendation. I know they'll have concerns about maybe the evidence base that might override some of their recommendations, so it's worth hearing from them on that perspective. And also
You're looking to get Ed Sykes in. Where's that at in terms of this? Has come up a number of times. Is it?
Funny, I was just emailing someone about coming to give that perspective.
So that is in progress.
That is in progress. Yeah, the committee has agreed to have several perspectives on the SEND transformation agenda, and we're working behind the scenes.
Didn't say it on there, but you had mentioned it before. But that's good. And is it worth checking get some classroom assistants? And they've sort of made the point that they rarely get the opportunity to speak for themselves. I don't know if there's a group or I could get a few of them in to kind of give us firsthand their experience.
It's finding ones who would put their head above the parapet to present in this forum. I mean, again, the researchers may have from their group, certainly I'm thinking even some of the classroom assistants who attended that research launch may be interested in doing that. So maybe one to take away in terms of what the right mechanism for that would be. But I think, that came through very clearly that one of the most important things is actually just listening, and this part of the workforce has never really been heard before, I think. So
we can offer an informal meeting as well so that any sensitivities can be contained. Thank you.
Okay.
I think as well, and it goes back to the question I was asking there as well, definitely hearing from classroom assistants directly, but again, this becomes a very specific element of work if you start doing this committee giving consideration to that. But I think you probably do have to consider all of this in the round in terms of how it looks, not just for the classroom assistants, but also to the teachers who are in the classroom there, the head teachers who are trying to run the school. There's numerous perspectives on this in terms of trying to come to a rounded view on what the future is for that role. So not at all against Michelle's suggestion, but I think we should probably consider, if we're going to look at that, how do we make sure we're getting a range of perspectives in?
Absolutely, and look, I think we already have Senkos in the mix to come in, which are really crucial in this, and I think we're looking to get classroom assistants, and hopefully Ed Sykes is another one. So it's really school leaders is perhaps the piece that's missing in that, and we've not really landed in this forum the best way to do that. I mean, I had proposed the NAHT before, which I think might be in progress, and that could perhaps form a part of a briefing to hear from that collective of school leaders. So and I'm reasonably content we've got enough things in progress to hopefully cover that if members are all agreed. Okay, great. That's fine. So look, we're given the size of the agenda, we're doing well, but there is a lot to get through. So I'm just going to move straight on to the next briefing, and then we'll maybe, unless anyone needs a comfort break at this stage, but we can maybe do that after this briefing if members are happy to continue. So that takes us on to item 7, and it's a briefing on educational underachievement from the expert panel on underachievement, and they're just making their way through now. So while the witnesses all get seated, I'll just refer members to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 52, a briefing paper from the Department of Education at page 5. We have the panel's opening statement at page 15 of tabled papers, some pen profiles of the panel at page 17 of tabled papers, Fair Start Progress Report, and that was as of the 30th of June 2024 at page 19 of tabled papers. So there's a fair bit of reading material to get through there. So really the committee had looked to get this evidence in. On the back of evidence we had heard around the RAISE programme, which was a direct outworking of the Fair Start report. So members were keen to hear the expert panel's views on that programme, but also on issues around educational underachievement more broadly, which reflect one of the committee's priorities. So I will just run through who we have here with us today. If I get any job titles wrong, feel free to correct me. It has been known to happen in the past. We've got Professor Noel Purdy, Director of Research and Scholarship at Stranmillis University College. And I should just say all members here represent the expert panel, so I don't need to say that for each one. We have Dr. Jackie Redpath, expert panel on underachievement, Mary Montgomery, also from the same, Mrs. Joyce Lowe, Principal at Long Tower Primary School in Derry, and Kathleen O'Hare, retired Principal at Hazelwood Integrated College and former Principal of St Cecilia's College. So you're all very welcome here today. we have a big panel, so I would certainly say we have, obviously there'll be a lot of interest from members in your work, and perhaps if maybe not every member needs to answer every question in the interest of time. But I think at this stage I'm really happy to hand over to you, other than saying we really appreciate your time on this. We know that the panel is not sort of formally constituted anymore in that regard, so we understand you are giving up your time independently to come and do this today for the committee, which we really do appreciate. So open up for opening remarks of up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer, and that will be around 5 minutes per member, just because we have another briefing after this that we do need to get through, but we're very much looking forward to hearing from yourselves.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Thank you very much for the invitation to us as the former members of the expert panel on educational underachievement in Northern Ireland to come and brief you on developments since the publication of Fair Start in June 2021. I don't think I need to go through the list of my panel members, except to say that I'm absolutely delighted to have the support of all of the panel who are here today, and with their expertise and experience as well. There are many new faces in this committee, though, so let me remind members that the expert panel was formed as an executive commitment under the New Decade New Approach Agreement, which had set out the requirement to establish an expert group to examine the links between persistent educational underachievement and socioeconomic background. The specific objectives of the panel, as set out in the terms of reference, were to examine the links between persistent educational underachievement and socioeconomic background, to give particular consideration to the long-standing issues facing working-class Protestant boys and specific actions to address this particular gap, to draw up an action plan for change that will ensure all children and young people, regardless of background, are given the best start in life, and to estimate the cost of implementing the action plan. We duly set about our work from September 2020 through to May 2021, during which we engaged mostly online as a result of COVID restrictions, with a wide range of stakeholders, including educationalists, parents and families, children and young people, policymakers, political and business representatives, and the voluntary and community sector. During the oral evidence sessions in late 2020, we met with a total of 344 individuals across 24 days, and included 6 regional sessions, although they were online as well, unfortunately, because of COVID, for the areas of Ballymena, Belfast, Cookstown, Derry, Londonderry, Enniskillen and Newry. On the 1st of June 2021, we published our final report and action plan entitled A Fair Start, which contains 47 costed actions across 8 key areas, focusing on early years, emotional health and well-being, curriculum and assessment, promoting a whole community approach to education, maximising boys' potential, teachers' professional learning, school leadership, and ensuring interdepartmental collaboration and delivery. Each key area introduced an introductory section, setting out a summary of what we wanted to achieve, evidence-based explanatory notes, and then, crucially, a summary of specific actions costed over the next 5 years. The plan was designed to start with a modest executive spend of 10.9 million in year 1, 2021-2022, rising incrementally to 73.1 million pounds in year 5, 2026-2027. We were very encouraged when all 5 executive parties at the time endorsed the action plan in May 2021, and we are similarly encouraged that they have continued to express their support for the actions, many of them specifically drawing attention to a fair start in election manifestos. It's important to remind members of this committee that our formal role ended, however, with the publication of a fair start on the 1st of June 2021, after which responsibility for the implementation of the actions rested and rests with the Northern Ireland Executive, led by the Department of Education, who moved to appoint a programme board in line with one of our actions in Key Area 8. Despite our formal role ending with the publication of the final report, we as a panel wrote to Minister McElveen in November 2021 to propose that we would continue to play an informal role in championing the full implementation of a fair start, as we were naturally concerned that budget pressures could hinder progress against the actions. As a result, we were offered briefings from officials which began in 2022 and which have continued 3 times a year. These informal briefings focus on one key area each time and allow us to keep up to date as to progress against our original actions. During these briefings, we've been impressed by the genuine commitment of officials to delivering the actions and by their hard work in very challenging budgetary circumstances. We've also been heartened by the continued support for a fair start by members of this committee and by the political parties represented here. However, let me conclude my opening remarks by saying that this afternoon represents a very welcome opportunity for us to draw your attention to the delayed or partial implementation of many of the actions due to the lack of funding allocated by the Northern Ireland Executive, despite this cross-party endorsement. While we were encouraged to hear the Minister's commitment to facilitate the standardisation of the preschool day, which is Action 4 in our plan, and by the announcement of the investment by the Shared Island Unit of the Department of the Taoiseach in the RAISE programme, which was another key action in our plan, albeit we called it the RED programme, we note with concern that in 2024-25, for instance, DE's total budget allocation for a fair start amounted to just £2.6 million. That's 6% of the £41.2 million that we proposed for this year in our original action plan. Chair, we are not politicians and we have no desire to enter the political fray. Instead, from the very start, we set out as a panel to produce a report to maximise opportunities for all children, irrespective of community background, and we are very proud to have produced a report which still has that potential. So as former members of the expert panel, we would therefore encourage you as current MLAs and members of the Committee for Education to join us in advocating for the full and complete implementation of the 47 actions in a fair start, because we remain convinced that with your support, the delivery of these 47 actions can make a significant difference, promoting equity, fostering greater collaboration between schools, families and communities, closing the achievement gap and giving all of our children and young people a fair start. My colleagues have many years of experience and expertise in school and community leadership, early years, curriculum, professional development and much, much more. And together we'll be pleased to answer your questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Note the strong emphasis on former members of the panel. I think that it is appropriate to note that clearly. I'll make a start with the issue of the RAISE programme, because that was really what had sort of sparked the conversation around hearing from yourselves, but I appreciate there are a whole range of other things I think around the implementation of Fair Start that will be relevant today. The issue of the criteria for the RAISE programme became quite vexed in committee in terms of trying to ascertain how that had been arrived at and how effective an approach was being taken by the department. So from your perspective, is the model that the department has adopted, is that an effective way to identify the areas that would most benefit from the intervention of the RAISE programme?
Well, I think it's fair that we start by reiterating that as former members of the expert panel, we played no role in devising the criteria. When you look at a Fair Start, you can see in key area 4 that we've proposed that Department of Education should co-design a specification for a whole community partnership approach. This should be strategic in scale, collaborative in nature, mandating co-design and the building of authentic partnerships between schools and communities using a place-based approach. But it was never our job to design the implementation phase of that. And while we might have received an update in relation to the criteria, we were in no way consulted or involved in the detail of working out which 7 criteria or 5 or 3 criteria would be used, nor were we asked or approached in relation to any weighting in relation to that, and we certainly didn't see any draft outcomes in terms of which areas would be selected or not selected. So I think that's important that we say that at the outset.
And in terms of, and again, I don't want to press you on a point that maybe you don't feel the panel is able to answer, but I think the committee had quite a considerable degree of interest in this in terms of the issue around free school meals being the method by which the department has ordinarily targeted interventions in relation to trying to tackle educational disadvantage or to identify areas where maybe the highest levels of poverty were exhibited. was it a surprise to you that was that was departed from and something else was set up? Is that something that you would have anticipated could have happened in terms of delivery of this?
Well, we hadn't predicted or tried to influence the department in any way in terms of the shaping of those criteria. What I would say is that clearly there are more factors than simply individual family income that contribute towards disadvantage, social disadvantage and educational disadvantage. And we were very aware, indeed many of our actions are cross-departmental because they realise the importance of other issues as well, including health, for example, and some of the other issues that are reflected, special educational needs that are reflected in the criteria. So I couldn't say whether I was surprised or not. It's not up to me to be surprised, but I can certainly appreciate that there are other factors involved, as well as free school meal entitlement. One of our actions, in fact, was to look at the measure of free school meal entitlement, precisely because we wanted to be sure that that was a robust measure. And we're aware that Ulster University did carry out some research and found that it's not perfect, but it's probably as good a measure of income deprivation as we might have.
Other members may want to pick up on criteria issues again, as it was discussed at length. I don't want to labour the point on that at this stage. Just one thing that it's connected but is a slightly different issue. In key area 5, and I think it was recommendation 7, there was reference to band 3 schools being supported by the RED programme, and there was just that phrase, band 3 schools, and it was particularly, that seemed to be around extracurricular inputs that should go in to support children and young people in those band 3 schools. What is a band 3 school? Can I just ask that first of all? What is that measure? It wasn't one I was familiar with. I genuinely didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was just trying to understand that it appears that that's maybe a measure that is used somewhere around how we identify areas of need, and it seemed to anticipate that the RED programme would go in to band 3 schools in particular.
I'm not sure we recall from 5 years ago what particular
that's fine. The reason I was asking the question, I genuinely was not trying to catch anybody out. That not my intention at all. It was because it was an action for the RED programme that would carry out interventions in band 3 schools, and I was just trying to understand what that refers to, because I don't know, and it was just to get a sense of whether that might have been something that we could look at in terms of raise, of whether there are a clearly identified set of schools already in existence that perhaps had been identified as needing these sort of interventions, but not clear on that. No, that's absolutely fine. Look, I'll ask one final question before I hand over to other members, and it's one in key area 4, and it was around a wraparound programme, your recommendation about providing sort of wraparound support for children who are experiencing educational disadvantage, and a programme of mentoring and counselling. And I just wondered if you had a view in terms of what sort of level of progress has been made on that, particularly in the primary setting where the Healthy Happy Minds pilot came to an end. And if you'd have an assessment of whether or not there is a gap in provision in terms of those sort of mental well-being wraparound supports, maybe bringing in health inputs, of whether there is a need to refocus that.
The Happy Healthy Minds was an excellent initiative. We were hoping out of that there would be follow-on, and it would have been great to have counselling in every school, and I think at the secondary schools, the text and nurse, in every school. The counselling at the minute in schools is being funded from individual school budgets, so it is down to whether a school can afford that. And often, they may be able to afford an hour or two. Like, speaking from personal experience in a primary school, I could be doing with a counsellor full time. I have a counsellor for 1 day a week, which we pay, and rob Peter to pay Paul to get that counselling. But most definitely, and I'm aware of the constraints in the budget. Within this plan, as Noel said, there were 47 actions. We hope that all these 47 actions would be implemented, and part of that would have been the counselling, particularly in primary schools, and I'm sure the secondary schools, Mary and Kathleen here can speak at greater length on that, but there's such a great need, and one of our major focus was early years. The more we put in at early years, the greater the benefit later on and the greater the savings. So yeah, definitely counselling would be a great thing if we were able to have it, and it's disappointing that we don't have the funding for that.
That's really helpful. I mean, it feels, and we talk a lot about early intervention in this committee, it feels like a really obvious early intervention to take that pressure off CAM services, and again I hear a lot from post-primary principals that transition into post-primary is often anxiety based, and if we can deal with some of that lower level anxiety maybe in primary and deal with it well and early and give children strategies to manage those things, that we could make progress.
I can just say it's not just at the transition, and it very much is a transition. We're seeing children as young as P1 with anxiety.
Oh, no, absolutely. And the point I was making, that sometimes the inability to maintain attendance at
Yes.
post-primary is anxiety based, and that we could
Whereas if we tackled it
that
early,
anxiety
yeah. No,
if tackled
Chair,
earlier.
can
So
I-
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, can I just add, Chair, that none of these 47 recommendations stood alone. They were part of a jigsaw which we thought, from our years and experience, would actually help address, underachievement, disadvantage. Like, I spent all my working life in off the Bogside in Derry and North Belfast. From years of experience, these were recommendations that, if accepted, would actually address underachievement and disadvantage in Northern Ireland. These were signed up to by the full executive, and we assumed at that stage that they would be put in action. Now, when Noel uses the phrase of 6%, I am gutted that, spending the time on this report to have it accepted by the executive and not to see it in action is just adding to the issues that we have currently. Currently, we have 25,000 young people between 16 and 24 not in education, employment and training. We have over 500,000 people not in education, employment and training. If we don't take united action and put the money behind these actions, that number is not going to get smaller, it's going to get larger. And communities that have people who are in third generation unemployed, third generation not getting higher than level 2 education, it's going to be fourth, it's going to be fifth, it's going to be sixth. And we're going to have all the other problems that we heard on the news today. So what I'm saying here, with no selfish strategic interest, because I'm no longer involved in education in any formal manner, this was signed up to by an executive, it was adopted, but it hasn't been funded. And I feel gutted about that.
You, Kathleen, that's been expressed very clearly, and I think will have been heard loud and clear from members around the table. I'm going to bring in the Deputy Chair, and then for other members to indicate beyond that.
Thanks, and first of all, let me state that at the time I welcomed the publication of the First Start report and the 47 recommendations, and that is still our position to this day. I'm sorry about this, though, but I want to drag you back to RAISE, because we had a presentation from officials here on the 23rd of October last, and we were trying to get to the sort of genesis of the RAISE programme, where it actually came from. And official in his opening remarks said, and I'm quoting here, "The RAISE programme was first conceived by the expert panel on educational underachievement, led by Dr. Noel Purdy." I then asked, whose idea was it to depart from free school meal entitlement as the key indicator? And the answer to that was the expert panel. My response then was, so Dr. Noel Purdy is responsible. I know they raised the issue in the First Start report, and I'm talking about a place-based approach, full community approach, but were they consulted prior to this programme being designed? And the response from the other official was, consulted over the past 2 years in terms of progress. And then I asked, were they being consulted specifically on this programme? And the answer was, updated regularly over the past 2 years. I then ask, were they updated or consulted? Sounds to me like you're saying this is the responsibility of Dr. Noel Purdy and the expert panel. And the response from the official was, it started with Fair Start. Officials took that on, working with the Fair Start panel and other pieces of evidence to develop options. We tested them with stakeholder reference group. We brought them forward to Minister. Would you like to comment on that? No?
Yeah, happy to respond to that. I can say categorically that we as a panel never discussed the criteria because that was never part of our job. That's implementation. That what you have in the Fair Start report that I read out at the start, Pat, is as far as we went with that, and we were always of the mind, and we were always very clear that our responsibility finished whenever the report was published, and we would have had no even informal role had we not approached the Minister, and we did that because we wanted to continue to champion the implementation of the actions, not because we had any role in terms of devising or being consulted on criteria. We were updated, and I think that's an important difference that I would want to make, and we're agreed on this. We were updated about the criteria, but we had no role and continue to have no formal role in terms of determining what those criteria would be.
Okay, fair enough, and I think that's quite clear. And I don't know why officials wanted to give that impression that the responsibility for the RAISE programme somehow rests on the shoulders of the former expert panel.
What I certainly could say, and I'm happy to say more about this, is where the idea of a place-based programme came from. So we're very happy to talk about that, and I know Jackie will want to come in on that as well. But we heard through our consultation process of the value of place-based community approaches. There are a small number in Northern Ireland. We also heard about international examples like the Harlem Children's Zone, and we were very convinced by the potential for this as a way forward. So that the genesis of the idea certainly came from us, and we wouldn't want to walk away from that at all. We're very clear about that. This was something that was very close to our hearts, and Jackie knows much more about it. I don't know if you want to come in now, Jackie, more about it than I do.
Sure, and about a minute left on the inquiry, so as much as you want to pack into that.
How long did you say? Just to say that the RAISE programme is a bit of a dream if it can happen as was intended, and we did propose the equivalent of the RAISE programme in the report, but not any particular criteria. I'll just say this about the proxy of free school meals. Noel has already alluded to work with Dundon and Ulster University. There's also work with Dundon and Queen's, which did say that proxy is a crude proxy. It's what we've got, it's what can be worked to, and very often is worked to. But for example, some of the work in Queen's showed that the qualifications of a mother is a much better indicator of advantage or disadvantage than anything else. But obviously the department can't get data on that to do that sort of thing. So there is, as Noel said, other criteria that can come into.
And I think, Jackie, if you don't mind me interrupting, I think everybody agrees free school meals entitlement is a fairly crude indicator. And the department actually scoped out alternatives and came back to free school meals. And I just wanted to move on quickly because I haven't much time left in terms of the weighting of the indicators. And it's well known that poverty is the greatest indicator of educational underachievement. And are you disappointed that that hasn't been given more weight than the other indicators that are being used in the RAISE programme?
I think one of the interesting things might be in terms of the allocation of funding and whether there's a weighting in relation to it or not that's worth looking at. What has happened is that there are 15 or variously 15 or 18 areas, we take Belfast being divided into 4, that are going to benefit from RAISE. And I think the difficulty that existed in people's heads was that if you purely go on the levels of underachievement, you know, it's very difficult to get out of Belfast or Derry, Londonderry beyond that. And yet there are serious underachievements in Portadown and Strabane and Ballymena, you know, wherever you go. So it becomes an issue of how you address this issue where it is, not just where it is most concentrated, but that place-based approach is very, very important. And I would fear that, you know, what we're talking about here, about a programme that can achieve something very significant, is able to do that, and that worries us at the moment. But the other big one, Pat, is that there are, you know, other streams of work in a First Start report that had the approval of the executive have not been implemented, or the money's not there to implement them. Apparently it's not in the draft programme for government, and I'm not sure why that is, since it was adopted by the executive. And if that's not finalised yet, it may well be worthwhile having a look at whether it could be put into the programme for government. But we would like, our call here is for you across the parties in the executive to champion the whole of the First Start report, including RAISE, which has got potential to make a difference, if done right.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. Danny, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually just going to probably follow on a bit from Pat, if you don't mind, on the RAISE programme as well, because look, I support First Start. I think the recommendations need to be implemented, and the funding needs to be there. Look, on that house, that the difficulties we have here with being underfunded by the British government, below need. But when we do have funding, I think for me it is frustrating when officials come in front of us, and maybe I'm being a bit harsh by saying they misled us, but it sounds like they have in this regard, because one of my concerns was that, you know, you can say that the geography of it and we need to share it out, and that's fair enough, but a part of the super output areas, like 2/3 of grammar schools, we're going to be able to tap into this funding, and that's what we were frustrated about, because if you're going to tackle underachievement, like, it must be something wrong in the grammar school if they're worried about their GCSE results, and then the schools that I represent and the school leaders I talk to, you know, school attendance is a huge pressure right now. Some of them dropping down as low as 75% in West Belfast. And then you just have the announcement this week that the minister doesn't want to look, or can't, is telling to go to budgets for primary schools around that early intervention, around counselling. And that's another growing concern of mine, because that, if we really want to tackle underachievement, you know, we need to get that early intervention. So when we do have this money with the RAISE programme, if done right, it's really frustrating. And that's suppose how we ended up to here today was, you know, it was the expert panel that was being labelled as the ones that done the formula that changed this. And I find it really frustrating, just hearing from you that that's not the case. It's really not the case. And, you know, is the minister actually misguided when we have money that we could be doing better stuff with that money to make sure we tackle underachievement rather than going down this route?
Can I just say, this was never, and it's unfortunate that it got tagged like this, this was never about money for schools. Mm-hmm. This was about putting a resource in to build authentic partnerships around the child who is underachieving, in whatever context that child lives their life, which is very often is in a large percentage of their life, something like 85% outside of actual school settings. So this was about building authentic partnerships. It was never about just money for schools, and therefore I think it's important to say that. And just the second thing in relation to that is that this was to be about a whole child, whole family, whole school, whole community and whole systems approach. What turns out to be 20 or variously 20 or 17 million spread across 18 areas or whatever is not actually a lot of money to do that. And the big money to do that lives in the whole system across every department that has anything to do with the life of a child. And it's that I think is where a massive focus needs to go, because no matter, Danny, how this is spent, it's not a silver bullet in this regard, and it needs a whole government approach to improve the lives of children in disadvantaged areas of Belfast, Derry, Londonderry and other parts of the province, you know. So So that would be a big, big prize if every department rode in against it. And the lessons of the Harlan Children's Zone is that.
I don't disagree. And that's sort of, it's not what I mean, but I know it won't be a silver bullet. What I'm saying is, we don't have much of the budget, and then you have every minister must prioritise as well. It just seems to me that this programme was put in front, and there was almost a convoluted formula put in place, and that we have the free school meals. It may be crude, but it is the best indicator. The departments say that themselves, and you would have had areas, for example, in my own constituency, which would be in the top 10 of social deprivation, who couldn't avail of that funding. But yet you could have schools, a prep school, for example, that I think is the frustrating part of it, and that's what we want to get into. I know you may not agree and like to jump across, David.
It's a straw man. Prep school.
David, come through the chair, please. Thank you.
But again, they put that information online. I didn't, and it was there, and that was one of the reasons I asked the questions. And I mean, as I say, the officials pulled you into it really by saying it was you who came up with that formula. That's what's frustrating for me as a new member on here, and I believe very much that I may have to go back and look at the Hansard myself, but I think that's very much misleading.
That was about tapping into the resource of youth services. They're a phenomenal resource in a community, particularly communities of disadvantage, because they engage and encourage and link in with young people. So in North Belfast at the minute, one of the programmes that we have is the involvement of youth services in school, and they have engaged with the Department of Health on a pilot where they are providing wraparound care in the schools that they service and taking young people off the CAMHS waiting list. So the Department of Health are going to Street Beat Youth Services saying, we've got these children in your area, they're on the CAMHS waiting list, it's so long we won't see them. Can you access them through the schools? So that's what's happening. They're getting mentoring and counselling exactly as we envisaged. And in an ideal world, Raise Money would be funding that voluntary youth service, not necessarily funding the school. So that was kind of the vision.
That's helpful clarification. Thank you. Michelle, you were next.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for being here. I'm one of the new members referenced in your notes at the start, Noel, and I think it's clear from the contribution so far why you are the expert panel. You've clearly got the expertise and the passion for this that is really coming across today with your answers, and it's obviously the report is so well received. I can understand now why you were the guys selected for the role. I want to go and talk about early years and some of those interventions and the need to pivot towards early years, and early intervention was a massive part of the report. One of the bits of feedback that I certainly have gotten a number of schools recently is about preparedness, readiness for school coming through. So I want to get a sense from yourselves in terms of your knowledge of the updates around the implementation of your report. Are you satisfied that there's a measure for that in place now, or what is your assessment just of progress around kids being prepared when they walk into school to be able to learn, to be able to function?
Yeah, as I said earlier, thank you. Early years was a major focus for the panel, and hence it's no secret why we have 13 actions in that. Part of our actions were to build a seamless journey from children from birth right through. And so while we had great hopes for these actions, and we were very happy to see the standardisation of the school day, and I think money has been guaranteed for that. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn up until 2026. I think in September there's 107 schools coming on, because we had a discrepancy. We had school children that were receiving 2.5 hours a day, 9:30 to 11:30, and others who were in school until 1:30 and having the benefiting from lunches. So that has been excellent. But if we don't catch children early, as I said, we have lost the battle. I mean, I see children at from P1 on, the gap is widening, and we're doing our young people an injustice here. So the standardisation of the school day, crucial. And the money allocated for that, it didn't all come out of the Fair Start, but I think Fair Start was the impetus for it. The other thing, I know there's money being given to the childcare strategy, to subsidise childcare, 15%, and again, very good. One of the things that's particularly dear to my heart was the money for the Tiny Life, Tiny Learners. And that was a programme too that would encourage schools to look at where a child's background came from. So there have been small gains, and we're happy with those. And special needs was a particularly big area. And again, I know the Minister's carrying out a review of that, but it's not enough. There hasn't been enough done. And, I think to date, over the past 4 years, we had anticipated a spend of 56.2 million. And I think the spend is somewhere like 2.559 million. We're nowhere near it. And, it's a false economy. I can't stress enough, if we don't catch the children early, we're just building up problems down the line. And it isn't just an education issue. And it goes back to what Jackie says. It's an interdepartmental issue. It's health, it's communities, it's everywhere. It's the Department of Justice as we go on down the road. So money put in early, it's a no-brainer. It gives impact. So while we're happy at some of the things that have come along, but it is nowhere near what we wanted or what we anticipated.
Can I just come in on the back of that as well? I mean, absolutely. 13 of the 47 actions related to early years, we were convinced from the outset. We provided evidence in the report as well, and we referenced that Heckman curve about the importance of investing early. It's more than offset by the savings later on. So we're delighted that there's such an interest in early years around this committee as well. But as Joyce said, it's just not enough. It's still not enough. And we know that the COVID impact in preschool in 0 to 2, 0 to 3 is significant. Those children are making their way into preschool, into P1 and P2 now, with higher levels of special educational needs. There has been investment in the early years SEN inclusion service, but again, if you ask anybody out in the sector, ask any preschool or foundation stage teacher, they'll say there's still not enough, and the need far surpasses, or the provision and support far surpasses the need that's there, and it's increasing all the time.
You'd have an expectation, because a number of places in that update report it references this will be dealt with in the early years and childcare strategy. Have you been consulted on that strategy and any of those inputs at all? No? Okay. One other thing I wanted to pick up
very
was
briefly, Michelle, we're out of time here.
Oh, Pat, get extra time, I'm getting extra. Childcare strategy, I've referenced the progress report again, just to come back to. It looks very much like it's the department who are providing those reports, and sometimes when I'm looking at some of the actions that are green, they don't feel like they're necessarily related to the reality that we've experienced. One I picked out was the 14 to 19 framework. We know that isn't progressing, yet it's in there with green to suggest that it's moving forward and it's on track. Would you have concerns that the department is marking its own homework with these reports, and should perhaps someone else be independently kind of updating us on that?
You make a very valid point. As chair of the Northern Ireland Skills Council, we're avidly watching the 14 to 19 report, which had some really brilliant recommendations. My fear will be by the time it's implemented that they will be completely out of date, because the 14 to 19 whole area needs great reform, particularly around one of the key areas, which is curriculum and assessment. We have an assessment system here in Northern Ireland which is very greatly weighted towards academic qualifications, where the recent Skills Barometer report, which was just out 2 weeks ago, pointed to the fact that we have a real shortage of people with level 3, 4 and 5 qualifications in Northern Ireland, and in areas where our education system doesn't even figure. So 14 to 19 needs implemented. Probably before it is, it now needs to be reviewed to see if it's current for today. But we've long awaited that, and equally asked questions why that is delayed. And I think those questions best come from people like yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
We can certainly take that away. We are hoping to meet concurrently with the Economy and Education Committees, so that's hopefully an issue we can take away. David, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to question you on RAISE, but I am going to give a view in terms of what's already been said, and that is that Pat has read verbatim, not contesting that from that particular session, but I would recommend going away if it's of interest and watching that entire session and seeing the tone and the drive of that particular session and the context in which comments were made, because I think it does set us a different tone. I do think we're continuing to hear about grammar schools and prep schools, and to be honest, I think that's a straw man. The list of schools that went out from the department, I think, should not have went out, was very misleading, was very unhelpful. But there are some around this committee table that are intent on using that continually for their own arguments, and I don't think it's appropriate, but I'll move on from that. Could I ask, just something that we're familiar with now is this around free school meals and free school meals entitled pupils do better in Catholic maintained schools generally rather than perhaps in our controlled schools or those within more Protestant working class areas. Is there anything, what is it you feel that is done better within that sector? And perhaps you can talk beyond that. Is there a cultural element beyond that that goes beyond the schools? But why do you feel that they are performing better than their Protestant equivalents in terms of the Protestant working class boys in particular?
I'll start on this, but I'm sure everybody will have an opinion on this, because there's no easy answer. It's an excellent question, David, and I've asked that question to 3 principals in the last week, 2 of whom are in high performing Catholic maintained schools with very high free school meal entitlement. And I've asked them, can they put their finger on what it is that makes the difference between their school and many, if not all, many of the controlled schools whose GCSE scores are quite a bit lower. And they couldn't, because they were saying, well, like, I'm sure the controlled school down the road puts their children first. I'm sure they have a strong pastoral ethos. I'm sure they, have strong leadership. I'm sure they're doing exactly the same as us. Previous reports, Queen's did the Iliad report a few years ago, which did talk about differences in community cohesion between traditionally Protestant loyalist working class communities and Catholic, Republican nationalist communities. And there was a suggestion that community cohesion is stronger in the Catholic community than it is in working class Protestant areas. That's one theory, David, but I think if we knew the answer to that, we would all be writing about it and insisting that the controlled schools adopted exactly the same model. But I think it's a broader societal piece, and it's very hard to put your finger on, but I'm sure others will want to comment on
David,
this.
I've gone from one sector to another, being head of a Catholic maintained school for 10 years and head of an integrated school in North Belfast for 6. I can say that it's no one thing, but the ethos of a school is key to achievement. You don't just find that in Catholic maintained schools. I've walked into controlled schools with a wonderful ethos. I'm looking at the one beside me, Kilkeel, for example, wonderful ethos, boys model ethos, but there has to be something around the value of education, and that's where that whole community combined together. When I was principal of Derry, I could have asked somebody in the Old Library Trust, the Bogside and Brandywell community, to come and help me to get a child back on board, and they would have. And sometimes they were funded for that and sometimes they weren't. I had to do a bit of work on that in North Belfast, simply because the school was probably newer in system, but I got great support, and I got great support from every single political party to ensure that happens. But I think there's something in building that community cohesion, and my colleague over here, Jackie, says it takes a village to raise a child. And I knew the power of that so well when I came to North Belfast. But I did feel when I walked into North Belfast from being in Derry that there was a decade behind in that cohesion.
And to be clear, I wasn't trying to be disparaging towards our controlled sector, because I think I point in my own consistency even to some very good, but it's just dealing with the data and sort of there's some discrepancy in how to try and get the bottom of that. Maybe just following on that, and this goes back to the report that you mentioned, one of the aspects that seemed different that it raised in Protestant wards compared to Catholic wards was the sort of supposed, and it's not an area that I'm particularly I have any expertise in, is the youth work, and the idea that the youth work was more fractured in Protestant areas relative to Catholic wards. is that a contributory factor, and how do you think? I mean, you discuss it in here, but how do you think that we change that, and do you think any progress has been made on that front?
Well,
Time is beating us, so I just
Okay.
ask for a brief response on this one.
Quickly,
Yeah.
youth work is transformative for young people who are subject to disadvantage. It's a key engagement tool for schools, and they are multifaceted in the supports that they can offer schools. So it's absolutely a resource we need to tap into.
And just, David, if I could just say, you know, in the Shankill, where I work and come from, we traditionally have had high levels of education underachievement in Shankill, Woodfield, Crumlin wards, among the worst. We have looked at the causes of this, and there's various layers to it, and there's no simple thing, and it's not just about schools. It's not about schools, but you know, there is a cultural difference. You know, I'm the last of a generation on the Shankill that didn't need a single qualification to my name to make my way in life, because I was going to get spoken for in Mackey's or the shipyard or wherever. As a community, we didn't need to value exams or education. Now we're 2 or 3 generations on, and we do, and we're playing very fast catch up. So it's a complicated picture and an interesting one, because we have so much in common with the Falls Road, you know, and the Shankill, but there are also differences.
Yeah, that's a cultural element I probably recognise as well. Thank you, Chair.
David, Cathy, you were next.
Sure. Unsurprisingly, I do want to go back to Ray's programme. I want to go back to a point that Jackie, you made around it being place-based. And, you know, when we were speaking to department officials just specifically about the programme, one of the things they said that they did want a geographic spread for the RAISE programme. Now, with that in mind, my own constituency of South Down has absolutely no funding. Jackie, you mentioned specifically Strabane, I think, as well, and there's no funding there, despite being levels or having high levels of high deprivation. What would your view be on that? Do you think that this programme has been successful then in being geographically spread, and do you think that a geographical spread is a good way to set policy?
I can say this. We wrestled with an issue about deprivation in rural areas when we met as a panel, because it's dispersed across it. You know, it's not concentrated in particular places, and it's easier to deal with things that are concentrated in particular places. So it depends on your definition of rural here, you know, that it was an issue that we actually highlighted as an issue. How do you deal with that? And we weren't sure. But what is for sure is that in the places, I don't know the detail of what was named or not named as areas, whether it's Strabane were in or out or whatever, but I can say this, that there are obviously places outside Belfast and Derry, Londonderry, that have got significant pockets of deprivation. And my guess, and it's nothing more than a guess, that it was an attempt to reach some of those places that, I mean, we were aware as a panel that there was stuff outside of Belfast and those 2 urban areas that needed attention. Now, how it was decided to get to those areas was beyond our remit. But I think we did anticipate that there were areas outside those 2 big urban centres, even though the greatest concentration is within them of underachievement, that required attention.
I think we'd be very sympathetic to issues of rurality, and I remember we did a session where we had a number of people from border areas and Fermanagh and so on that had to travel many miles to access any services at all. So we're certainly very sympathetic to that, and I suppose it just comes down to implementation and criteria and super output areas and so on. But so we would be, of course, broadly supportive of as many people accessing the funding as possible. I mean, that goes without saying.
I take that on board, but it's very clear that there are huge gaps. If this is the case, that it's a geographic spread, in my view, it hasn't hit those. I want to actually ask about Irish medium as well, because I know it's specifically referenced within the First Start report as well, and we know it's an area that's disproportionately high, or levels of disadvantage as well. And I know Collier and Gil Sculliocta had commissioned a lot of research through First Start funding as well. What would your view be on whether those specific actions that were around Irish medium can, will the RAISE programme hit those? Will it, make any difference, or do you think it's going to maybe add to that, further disadvantage in those areas?
I'll maybe make a start there. And so we had representation from Corlia and Gaelscoileachta, and since then we've been involved with them. I'm currently undertaking a research project for them, looking at the workload of Irish medium teachers in the sector. There have been a number of other research studies. One published just a couple of weeks ago, really a review of the 2008 review that I attended here. The Queen's report that was published about a year ago, led by Aisling Boyle. All of these have highlighted particular challenges. We were convinced from the very outset, from the first presentation we had from Corlia, about the particular challenges facing the Irish medium sector, and that's why we wrote 2 of the 47 actions specifically related to the Irish medium sector. Raise, what we called RED, is only one action. These are 2 very distinct, separate actions, and we certainly wouldn't want Raise to overshadow or eclipse any of the other 46 actions in the report, and particularly in relation to the Irish medium sector, where there are undoubted challenges, and that's been well proven in recent research.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, we were very cognizant of the Irish medium sector, particularly their resources, assessment. There are so many areas that they are struggling with, and it is a growing sector, and it does need a lot more, and we had hoped by including this in our report that they would get our full backing, and we're still hopeful,
But you don't feel today that it has?
Funding has been given. I think it's 100,000 has been given to fund a coordinator and to carry out research. But is it enough? No.
I know there was some work done with SIA as well, because that time I was vice chair, because there was difficulty getting examiners from the Irish medium sector, and I know that they were accessing for a start to try and redress that. Now we have no update on how that is going, but that was a real issue because it is a growing sector.
And another real issue is staffing, is teachers in the schools. And I mean, we have so many parents that want to raise their child through the medium of Irish, and we all know the benefits of a second language, and we had hoped that would be a big focus, that we would get more into the sector to that would be able to speak Irish. And I think the Education Authority have formed a committee and have tried to recruit Irish speakers into that to support the Irish medium. But it's like a lot of it, of our actions, there's not enough done yet. We need more.
Time is going to beat us, but there'll be a number of things we can pick up for follow-up from this. So Colin had indicated next.
Sorry, Chair. No, I took my hand down. Both my questions have been answered. So thank you, guys.
No problem, Colin. I'll bring Peter in then.
Thanks very much, Chair, and folks, thank you for your presentation this afternoon. I'm going to sort of slightly return to what my colleague was asking about, and the differential in terms of outcomes for Protestant Catholic children in Northern Ireland. Your research, Table 17, put the gap at 8.6, and we got research recently that the gap between controlled non-grammar and Catholic non-grammar was 8.6. Different. They're measuring different things, but they're sort of similar in terms of what they're driving towards. Do you feel that the control schools need more support in Northern Ireland? We have brilliant control schools. They're working really hard. Do you feel they need more support? And do you think would you agree with the independent review panel that having EA as their managing authority is problematic? And is there a way of addressing it? Clearly the minister's indicated a direction of travel. Do you think that is one of the things perhaps that could help, or are there any other things? I mean, Mary, you're one of these principals. I mean, what are the things you perhaps feel would be helpful in trying to reduce that gap that we see in every research paper that we find, trying to reduce that down?
Well, there has been an announcement that there will be a specific support body for controlled schools, so that's a step in the right direction. We'll see what that turns out to be, but there's a real critical gap in terms of leadership support, and we talk about that. There's dearth of TPL for the teaching profession across the board, but key area 6 leadership is I mean, there is absolutely nothing that is contextual and specific to leadership in a context of educational disadvantage, whether controlled or not. So there's a huge piece of work needs to be done there. Now, there's been some money spent, around about $500,000 so far, through the Education Authority on the Association of Educational Advisors, which is a qualification or an accredited course that principals can do, but it's not contextual, it's not specific. And when you're serving an area of disadvantage, the plethora of challenges that you face on a daily basis, I mean, it would be our vision that there would be a place to go for expert advice and support and guidance relevant to that context. And you know, respectfully, a qualification is good, but you need someone at the other end of the phone when you've got something very significant to deal with that's quite specific to your context. So there really needs to be something around leadership, because that's a transformative piece. It doesn't matter how good everything else is. If you have poor leadership, then the children in that school are unlikely to thrive.
I second that for Mary. The investment in leadership is dreadful. I became a head teacher in 2002, first time, and there was huge opportunities to do PQH, MBAs, do common purpose, lots of leadership programs. None now with credible sources. And I have to say there is a piece of action which could happen. As principal of an integrated school, Protestant boys did equally, and Protestant children did equally as well as Catholic children. And why was that? I'm just leaving.
Oh, that's not a question to me.
No, I'm not. Sorry.
It's at least rhetorical, Kathy, because you're going to get me in real trouble over here.
It was, Peter, and I have to, and here I have to call out the fact that previous Education Minister Peter Weir was very key in recognising Protestant boys' underachievement, and he hasn't been lauded for that.
Can I make one final point on that? I'm not a school leader, so perhaps I'm unqualified to say this, but we need to be better or get better at tapping into the expertise and experience of principals, like the principals I'm surrounded by today, who can't be allowed to simply retire and not share that expertise and experience with other aspiring or newly appointed principals in very challenging circumstances, like the circumstances where my colleagues have succeeded beyond all expectations. So I think that's an important. I mean, we do make that recommendation, or we certainly touch on that in Key Area 7, as Mary says, but there hasn't been adequate progress in terms of replacing PQH and in providing some kind of effective mentoring by experienced principals who have walked the walk in challenging communities, and that's something I feel strongly we need to take that forward.
And I'll add very quickly, and the result of that is we're having less people applying for principal roles and for leadership roles. So and that has a knock-on effect down the line.
That's great, thank you. And I think that the whole issue of how we actually give school leaders access to best practice is really, they just don't have time to go out and even visit other schools, you know, let alone a full mentoring program, just to go and visit a school and see what's working well. Sorry, Peter.
I just got one question.
Time had already beaten you, but I mean, everyone else got a little bit extra, so I'll give you one for a very short question and very brief answer.
Am I the last?
And, no, one more. So
okay, I was going to say one for the road there, Chair. So you said that it's in your remarks, this lack of funding by the executive, and the Chair is going to keep me brief. How important, and I'm glad you put the executive, because it's an executive document, you know, and I think there's sometimes on the committee a temptation to hone in on the minister or on the department. If you had one message for the Northern Ireland executive in terms of funding and Fair Start, what would it be?
Well, that's the message that we gave right from the very start, Peter, and that is that this was from the outset an executive commitment through New Decade, New Approach. All 5 executive parties at the time endorsed the Fair Start action plan, and we need a funding commitment and a resource allocation to come from the executive rather than putting all the onus on one department, because it was never meant to be a single department action plan. It was always meant to be cross-departmental, and that would be the key message, I think, from all of us here today.
And it needs to be part of the programme for government, so we'll be watching that space.
And look, that's again, we'll look at actions arising from this at the end of the session in terms of how we take some of that forward. Cara, I'm going to bring you in for the final.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be brief, otherwise I think you'll kill me. Thank you all very much to the panel for being here today. Thankfully, my other colleagues have already raised issues around geographical spread, so I thank them for that. I'd just like to raise a point. We've been talking a lot at the committee about school refusal and anxiety-based avoidance, and I note on page 13, it showcased in our pack about obviously absenteeism has a really profound negative impact on the outcomes and educational attainment of our young people. Just the undeniable link of being, from a deprived area, you're 3 times more likely to experience an adverse childhood experience. And I know you had touched on your document about the importance of early intervention, and that can improve mental health, physical health, and overall academic outcomes for young people. I'm just curious, one thing I had raised weeks previous on this issue was if our young people are in sort of key stage 3 or, around that GCSE sort of age, they're refusing to go to school, 2 to 3 days a week on average. Do you think we're providing them enough opportunities to get back into the school setting to get those grades? This was something that was flagged to me by a parent who said, my child has missed a lot of school and I just feel we do not have those opportunities to help them get the education and the grades that they might need to prosper in society. Quite a large question, I suppose, but I'm all ears. Thank you.
Well, I'll take that one simply because it's that's happening in my school, and the strength of your community partners. So we would be linking in with integrated services, with youth service, with the statutory services of education and welfare and so on. So as a school, you've got to be forward thinking, you've got to reach out and have networks of people, because 99 times out of 100, a parent will not open the door to a teacher, but they will open the door to a youth worker, someone from family support services. We have pastoral staff, and that's because of additional funding that we have through targeting social need and also being part of the full service extended schools programme. We can afford parenting support, which is what we envisaged in RAISE. As being something that could be funded, because those people live in the community, they know the community, they know the challenges, they are much more accessible for vulnerable parents. Now that sounds like it's not a vulnerable parent necessarily that you have, but they need they need the conduit into school, and then schools need to be flexible in how they respond to the needs of that young person, whether that's a phased re-engagement programme, whether it's joint working with outside agencies, with counselling, mentoring, hooking them into a youth club, getting them involved in a football club, that holistic wraparound response that we envisaged in Fair Start.
Well, that's brilliant. Thank you, because I did note the importance around early intervention, but I was thinking for those children at the other end. So no, that's a really helpful answer. Thank you.
All right, Cara, I'm just going to come in there. It's also creeping into the primary school. I mean, I've long heard about the secondary schools. And, I mean, I'm in the primary sector well over 35 years, and it's creeping in there as well, which I've never seen before. And we're having to think outside the box as to how we manage that. So it is an issue.
Definitely, and that's why I'm so happy it's come to committee and we're having these conversations, because I think you're right. I think it's just going to continue to grow and grow until we really identify it as a massive issue. But no, that's extremely helpful. Thank you to the panel for being here and for sharing your insights. Thank you.
Sure. Could I just say that this is where the level of the conversation really needs to be, whether there's RAISE or not. I mean, in Greater Shankill, we're doing an area plan to be presented under RAISE, but it'll be way beyond what RAISE can do anything about, And last night I was just looking and preparing for this at a model that we had from the Harlem Children's Home, which is loads of money and more money than we'll ever dream of, but the principles are the same. And they actually talk about having an interlocking network of education, health, family, social services and community. And Cara, that's what Mary was just referring to. That's the prize that we can get in areas of disadvantage, an authentic partnership across all those interlocking things, because That's hard. Children's lives are complex, and they live their lives, and young people, in many different contexts. We need to bring those contexts together, and that's actually what was at the heart of the picture that we had, or the vision, if you want, that we had about RAISE, or whatever it's now. Yeah, RAISE as it's now called.
Well, that's really helpful, and one of the things that has just been in my mind through the whole evidence session is Children's Services Cooperation Act, and again, this committee has felt like it's been banging its head off a brick wall. Every time we raise that, sort of officials' eyes seem to glaze over, and I think it might be something we can look at in terms of how's that legislation being utilised to actually ensure we get buy-in from all those departments that you've also articulately outlined need to be involved and around the table to make this work. So that's been a really helpful briefing, and thank you all for giving up your time for us today. It's been very much appreciated. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
So while witnesses are just making their way out, we'll get through actions arising quickly because we do have another evidence session to follow. So I'm going to just put two proposals out there, and there may be others then that we hear from others. I think the first is on Children's Services Cooperation Act. I would suggest, and I wanted to say this clearly, I would suggest we write to the Education Minister, solely because that act is a responsibility. It sits under the department, but it would be with a view to a piece of correspondence, I would think, around what is being done with all the departments to engage that legislation, specifically in relation to activating the recommendations of Fair Start and the pooling of resources around activating Fair Start. I think would be one I would like to take away, and I think to get the department in to brief us on Fair Start. I think, Michelle, you had highlighted that concern. A lot of these things in the report come back as green. Are they really green? Are they definitely all in train, and are they actually progressing as outlined? So I think it would be good to hear from them if members are agreed on that. Happy to hear other proposals. I would ask everyone if you've got a proposal on any action, quick to the point, and we'll hopefully get it agreed and moved on. Is there anything else arising from that, David?
Right to whether the Executive Officer Finance is the most applicable in terms of establishing resource, not just for education, but for that whole piece in terms of Fair Start and educational underachievement.
Perhaps be the Executive Office. I know certainly even from, I attended a briefing at the Thrive project, which is very much a kind of one of the, a sort of a precursor, I think, of sort of how RAISE has rolled out. And there was an Executive Office official there at that briefing, and they had a real interest in how this sort of work could model out collaboration across departments. So I'm happy that we do that as well.
Executive Office holds oversight of it. So I think we should write and say, that's what my colleague said. Let's get some feedback on that.
It's like a 2 or 3 sensible actions we've got there. Anything else? All agreed? Okay. I've had a few directions that a comfort break is required, so we'll do that very, very quickly, and I would ask quickly, as soon as we have quorum, we restart in the meeting. So if we can take a quick comfort break and then on to the next item. Just for session.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Not clean, the one the other side.
Okay, members, so that's us back into public session. So if they want to bring the witnesses through, we are now at item 8 in the agenda, and it's a briefing from the Education Authority on the minor works transactions process. So I refer members to a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 324, briefing paper from the Education Authority at page 326, just let the witnesses get settled and we'll go through the admin. We also have a response from the Minister of Education on a number of issues, and one of those was spending on minor works and school enhancement projects, and that's at page 82 of tabled paper. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and sincere apologies for the delay in getting to your evidence session. The session with the Fair Start panel it was a big panel and a lot of interest in it, so it did run over time a little. So we're very grateful today to have Richard Pengelly, Chief Executive of the Education Authority, with us, Donna Allen, Interim Director of Operations and Estates at the EA, and Roger Sayers, Assistant Director of Infrastructure and Capital Development at the Education Authority. So given the time is against us, I'll probably dispense with any major preambles. We're receiving a briefing today in relation to minor works capital projects in general, and some of the issues arising from the funding provided to Lisneal School in particular, as they gave rise to the committee's engagement with some of the issues. So I'm happy to hand over to yourselves for any initial remarks. I would normally say up to 10 minutes. I think if we can definitely aim to keep it under 10 minutes, that would be good to give members time to move into question and answer. So look, I'll hand over to yourselves from here.
Okay, Chair, thank you. I'll just say a few points, and I'll restrict them as best I can. Really, there's two things at play in terms of minor works, and just to be clear, I get the fact that the committee's interest is minor works. There may be a specific issue about one school. I'd want to dominate that in terms of the committee's questions. The paper that we've circulated, I hope, unpacks a lot of the issues. I think in terms of the committee's legitimate interest and the points that they're concerned about, I'll just jump over that and move straight to questions. With your indulgence, there's also a wider and parallel media debate about some issues. I just thought it would be useful to take a couple of minutes. I think helpfully the main media interest in this, a week or so ago, there was an editorial that said there are 4 key issues of concern. And I thought briefly to run through the 4 of those, not least for the wider audience that may be watching this, but also it may help just with some of the committee's points. But the 4 areas that were identified as being, these are the issues that it's all about. Firstly, this is a story about a school that received significant funding without a formal application. That is the case, and it is the case that there was no need for an application, because we do not require applications for the control sector for Priority 1 projects. The context is important. The issue today, we're talking about minor works in the control sector. There are separate processes for the non-control sector. In terms of the control sector, there was no need, so it wasn't anything that was missing or erroneous about the process, the lack of an application form. We are the asset owner. Education Authority owns the assets. At one level, you could say an application would therefore have been us applying to ourselves. So, oftentimes we're accused of being far too bureaucratic and having too many hurdles. So the lack of an application process when we don't need one, and we have hard teams on the ground. So that was the first point. The second point, it's about EA claiming that the pitch was a major health and safety risk. It is a major health and safety risk. That was the assessment that was undertaken in 2019 by one of our experienced ground maintenance staff. It was then confirmed by an independent report. That has been the case, and the work has always been predicated on that. The reason for this point is we made a mistake on the 31st of January when we said this pitch hadn't been in use. There's context around that that this was trying to put a statement out on a Friday evening to try and allay some growing public concern about what was happening. We didn't have the opportunity to do all the checks that we would normally seek to do. We got that wrong. We hold our hands up. We're sorry for that. It shouldn't have happened. But a mistake that was made on the 31st of January 2025 doesn't undermine an assessment that took place in 2019 and 2020. The other point I would say, and the paper sets this out, it is a health and safety risk. We're capable of mitigating that at a local level by some make, do and mend type repairs. None of the repairs that have been taking place have in any way addressed the medium to long term issues with the quality of this service. I could draw an analogy that, for example, if a school needed a new heating system or a new roof, again, we can put local contingency arrangements in place that the school can remain open while we're awaiting the completion of the big project. It doesn't mean the roof doesn't need repair, the heating system doesn't need replaced. Thirdly, it's about the funding coming after a meeting with not one but two ministers and an MLA. All I want, it's not for me to talk about meetings that I wasn't at or ministerial meetings. This project, the timeline started in 2019 and we can trace it through and the paper sets it out. I'll not get into the detail of that, but this is a normal timeline for a project of this magnitude. Unfortunately, they take 3 to 4 years. That's the timeline for this, but this started with the school indicating there was a problem in our inspection process kicking in. And then finally, it's about the Minister belatedly admitting that he tried to pause the funding. I think that's just a simple misreading of a letter. Following the meeting, we were asked to provide an update in terms of a project that we had responsibility for and we were taking forward. We did that. The letter that I think has been misinterpreted said we sought an update from EA and they have indicated that the project remains on hold. It was on hold simply because all the component parts were falling into place except the budget. This was in the summer of 2024. It was early June 2024 where we received confirmation of our capital budget. By the time we disaggregated that and allocated individual projects, that took us to the sort of August timeline where we initiated the tender exercise. That came back with prices and then we formally initiated the project. So that's just, I think that letter's been slightly misread. Other than that, Chair, I think it's probably easiest just to stop there in terms of time. Just to emphasise again, the fact that we did get something wrong, we've admitted that. If you allow me, Chair, I would say there's been a lot of commentary on this by a lot of people. I think most people along the way have got something wrong about this. Uniquely, we have held our hand up and said we get something wrong. I'm not surrounded by others who have done that. I would just say, don't let that undermine everything else we're saying. Just it's important that we acknowledge we got something wrong, and we will always do that. But that's, as I say, I'm more than happy to work through any questions.
Okay, that's fine. And look, thank you for those introductory remarks and for the material you've sent through. And thank you also for making yourself available to committee at short notice. That was turned around very quickly, and that is appreciated. I think that you've outlined right from the outset. There's the issue of one school, and then there's the issue of minor works as a separate issue. I'm actually just going to go straight to minor works as a separate issue. Others may want to pick up on the specifics. I'm just conscious that I'm only going to probably cover one thing well, so I'm just going to get to minor works, and it's really around what this whole story and how it's rolled out has illustrated, which is how little everybody looking into the system really understands how it operates, and I think just how difficult it is to really clearly get a grasp on how these projects are prioritised and identified and how they're taken forward and what the process is. And you set out in your briefing 3 categories of minor works projects: priority 1, priority 2 and priority 3. Priority 1 being projects that meet inescapable statutory requirements such as health and safety, fire protection and statutory obligations under the Disability Discrimination Act. So I want to just ask, are you comfortable as an organisation that the projects that go into the pot as priority 1 are being appropriately designated as genuine priority 1? This is the absolute, in terms of what's critical for delivery of education, that's what's going in there, or critical in delivery in terms of keeping people safe and meeting those statutory requirements. So that's my first question. Priority 1, are we comfortable and confident that what's in that pot, that those are the right projects?
Thanks for that, Chair. I think the answer to that lies probably in the nuances of the construction sector in many ways, but Roger, are you happy to unpack that?
Yes, absolutely. Look, we are content, and there's multiple gateways into checking what is a priority 1 project. They're generally statutory projects that we must do. They relate to the like of health and safety or the Disability Discrimination Act or other things that we must do as an organisation to keep children safe and in education. So there are many projects that are applied for that don't fall into a priority 1 category, that fall into 2 or 3, or fall out with any of those 3 categories as well. We are confident certainly that the projects that we're taking forward fall into the category 1. they're reviewed along the way, and as the feasibility work is carried out, as the business case is assessed, it checks again and again that those projects are definitely priority one, and it looks at a range of options as to how we would solve what that problem might be.
Could I ask then, just so looking at priority 3 applications, they're described as curriculum-based projects that would currently meet unmet needs in schools.
Yes.
If a pitch is not safe and can't be used, does that not just become an unmet need? And I'm not talking about Lisneal, I'm talking about any school that they'll be looking at a pitch. So I'm just trying to weigh up the engagements I have with principals who will talk about, well, let alone not having a pitch, they don't have changing rooms because they've all been condemned and the toilets can't be used. Or, when it rains, there's water pouring through, classrooms across 2 floors, or toilet blocks being condemned, or entire aspects of the curriculum that can't be accessed because those classrooms aren't fit for purpose. If those are unmet, if a pitch is priority 1, does that sit comfortably along those sort of examples that I've given you as in the same level of priority? Or if you don't do that work, does it just become a priority 3 because it's an unmet need?
Well, the way we look at the unmet need from priority 3 would be a school saying, for example, we would be entitled to 6 science labs. We've only got 4 or 5. And it would be us aiming to say we want to do priority 1, 2 and 3, but we can't do that within the budget that's been allocated. The pitch, as a generic example, or in this case, was deemed priority 1 because it was unsafe rather than because it was to do with an unmet need.
School came to you and said, we don't have a pitch. Would that be an unmet need?
It would depend on the number of other pitches that they have, and in terms of pitches, it also looks at the site. So the building handbook recommends a certain number of pitches based on the number of pupils who attend that particular post-primary or primary school. It gives a range of options in terms of the synthetic type or the grass type, and it also depends quite uniquely for pitches on the actual availability of land. Generally, you can get to the building handbook schedule of accommodation for the building, but that impacts on the amount of pitches or car parking or whatever the external resource happens to be. So not necessarily. It doesn't mean that because you don't have a pitch, it's a priority 3. But in this case, the priority 1 was given because of the unsafe nature of the pitch.
And could that unsafe nature of the pitch have been addressed by simply not using it until resource became available? And I mean, I again can apply that to any school. I'm just trying to get to that sense of when you meet with principals that they're often in scenarios where you can't quite take in what you're seeing in the school. And I don't necessarily want to even give examples of specific schools because I don't necessarily think they want to have their school highlighted as a building that's fallen apart. But I have been in schools that are literally falling apart, where they have entire sections where the phrase is, this section of the school has been condemned and we're not allowed to access it. When we're dealing with those kind of issues, it seems to me very hard to understand that a pitch would be just in the same pot of all the same sort of priority 1 issues. And I'm not sure the public get that. So I suppose I'm trying to establish, is there any acknowledgement within the organisation that perhaps what this issue has done is highlight a need to relook at those priorities and perhaps review the process so that we can reinstill a bit of confidence into the system that it's transparent and that it is equitable in terms of making sure that really scarce resources go where they are absolutely, clearly, objectively most needed.
I think if we give Roger just a moment to confirm his thoughts, the point you've made, I think that's an entirely fair point to make, Chair, that if this is highlighted anything, it's highlighted, maybe we need to do a bit more work to better articulate the differential components between priorities 1, 2 and 3, and that's certainly something that we're more than happy to take away and do. And and I say that not in the spirit that we need to be tasked to take learning from this. We will be doing our own lessons learned exercise, and I will be commissioning some work to see what have we learned from this. But I think the point you make is a very, very fair one, and it's something that we would want to do.
I agree, absolutely. The way we work at the moment is based on those ministerial priorities for 1, 2 and 3. There's no doubt we've been thinking about this, particularly in the month of February, about what things might look like going forward. I think we'll commit to working with the Department of Education if that's what they want to do, to consider those priority 1, 2s and 3s and maybe take stock with something that has been a process for quite a while now.
And I think, Chair, sorry, not to labour, but just to emphasise that where we are sure of our ground is that we, in terms of any school or any location, we have consistently applied the definition on our operating model in terms of the definition between priority 1, 2 and 3. The point we're making isn't so much that we need to review how we've applied that. I think we need to review how we define that and how we make that more accessible.
Are the definitions and the kind of cases that are going into each of those pots, are they appropriate?
I think that's fair.
I'm not convinced they are, and I think some of the other questions around where does the level of decision-making responsibility sit? These are substantial sums of public money, and it's just to get a sense as well. I think if there's any review being undertaken, I just want to put it on the record that I think just what the chain of accountability there is, that I think there is again, principals looking in may feel, so someone can just, once a box is ticked that's priority 1, it's in there, and I have to sit in priority 3, and there's nothing that can be done. So I think those feelings, this is a reflection of scarce resources, and we need to, when you're custodians of public money, it needs to be clear how that's being done. I'll not labour that point. If I could ask just a clear undertaking that whenever the outcome of any internal review of these processes done, that be brought to committee. I think we would all want to see that. No, that's fine. I'm going to bring the deputy chair in. Again, we'd just emphasise to members we are short on time. It's an important issue, but if we can get to our questions quickly, that would be helpful. So I'll bring in the deputy chair.
I want to continue along the same line, because the EA said that there was an inescapable health and safety pressure. To me, inescapable means there was no alternative. But in this case, there were a number of alternatives. One, the pitch could have been closed down, full stop. But it wasn't. It was still being played on. The other alternative is that there are other pitches in that school that could have been used. So whatever about health and safety, it wasn't an inescapable pressure. Would you accept that? Now what we know, that the pitch has been played on from the first time it was raised as an issue, and that there are other facilities that could be used other than this pitch.
I don't know if Roger knows more of the detail about the alternatives. My understanding is that the school very much relies on this footprint as its main recreation area, break space. It's about allowing the kids the opportunity to go out from indoors into the fresh air. And I think so that there's limited other alternatives to this. The bit about, so it could have been closed. It certainly, you could argue, could have been closed for any of the after school type activity. There wasn't an alternative in terms of not replacing it in terms of if it was going to be used.
But Richard, it was being used, and the point is, if it was being used, it wasn't an inescapable health and safety pressure. Do you not accept that?
I don't, Pat, for the reason that if a roof needs replaced, it's not every time a roof needs replaced or every time a school needs a new traffic management system, we don't on that day close the school. But that remains an inescapable pressure. We put in place at a local level a risk assessment and local mitigating factors, but that's make, do and mend until we do the job that we need to do. So it's not that I'm arguing for the sake of arguing. That, there are situations where we don't have an alternative.
Well, fair enough, I don't accept that point, but on your own website it says there's no ranking process within the priority 1 categorisation. There's simply no robust way unique projects that are all a high risk can be compared against each other. So let's take this example and compare it to a school that has water coming in through the windows. The children have to be moved away from the windows so they don't get wet, or there's water coming through the ceilings, as the chair pointed out. Are you telling me you can't make a comparison between those particular issues?
What I'm saying, Pat, and again, Roger may talk about the sort of...
No, I'm asking you about what was on your website.
Yeah, I know, I'm going to answer that if I'm allowed to, Pat.
Certainly, go ahead.
I'll bring Roger in. If there's water coming through windows, or if there's the heating system not working and that needs replaced, we will do a short-term fix to stop the water coming in or to get the heating system working on a non-sustainable basis. The reason we don't prioritise a pitch versus a heating system or a set of windows in these circumstances is because if they've both entered the priority 1 bucket, they both get done. They both get done when they're ready to be done. But if I take this example, we have a pitch that needs replaced, and say in another school we have a roof that needs replaced or a whole set of windows. In most, and Roger maybe add, but in the vast majority of cases, we can only do that major piece of work to replace the window system, to replace the heating system in July and August when the school is closed. So if we're going to do a piece of construction work, as we're doing replacing a pitch in February, we can close a pitch for a couple of months and do the resurfacing and do the site works and do the fencing. But because we're doing that now, it is not to suggest that that is more important than a roof. We can't throw the kids out of the school for 4 months in February to fix the windows. That can only happen at certain times of the year. So the point is we don't need the prioritisation because we manage the projects on an orderly basis and take them forward when they're ready to be done. But let me just finish. All priority 1 projects get done. Ranking is an outworking of making choices between what you're doing and what you're not doing.
I suppose the issue is whether this should have been a priority 1, and the chair has already raised that issue. So I'm going to move on slightly, because you know yourself, there's enormous demand for funding for various pieces of work to be done in schools, and there's a very tight budget for doing that. So is it appropriate, therefore, that monies which should be allocated on the basis of educational need are being provided to upgrade a pitch to a standard that isn't actually required by the school?
Well, we weren't upgrading the pitch, we were replacing the pitch, and we were doing it in line with the handbook that sets out the standard for all pitches. And I think in terms of the centrality, again, not to labour this case, but this is an open space which is the main recreational space used for pupils attending the school. Mental health challenges, as we all know, and you'll know better than me from your constituency work, are acute, and it's an epidemic across the set. Allowing individuals the opportunity to get outside and do a bit of exercise, this is not the cherry on the cake. This is a fundamental
But there was
importance.
educational funding used to bring the pitch to a standard that wasn't required by the pitch, wasn't required by the school. So that money could have been used elsewhere for some more pressing or urgent need. But it wasn't. It was decided that it would go in to bring this pitch up to a certain standard.
Are you specifically saying doing it at all, or is it the issue about, in terms of the paper mentions, the option 2 versus the option 3 choice?
Well, I'm talking about money that should have been used for education, but was used to bring a pitch.
Children being safe at school, I think, is part of the education journey.
There was no need to upgrade that pitch to the standard it was upgraded to just for school use. Do you not accept that?
No, I'm sorry, Pat. I'm honestly, I'm not trying to be difficult.
This is information that's coming from yourself and from the department.
But are you saying? But is that saying that option 2 was preferable to option 3 as opposed to do nothing? Because that was the 3.
I'm not interested in option 1, 2, or 3. What I want to know is why money was spent that is supposed to be earmarked for education, but was used instead to bring a pitch to a certain standard that wasn't required by the school. That's a simple question.
The pitch is required by the school. The pitch is part of the school estate, and the school estate is used for education purposes.
Money used over and above what was required for the pitch to bring the pitch and the surroundings to a certain standard.
The DE handbook standard?
No, not the. Never mind.
No, sorry, that's a statement of fact.
No.
It was brought to the DE handbook standard.
There was. Brought to a specification.
Time at the minute, we just
the pitch was brought to a certain specification
question
that wasn't required by the school.
It was brought to the DE handbook standard, the specification, and the paper brings that out.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Kathy, you'd indicated next.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a couple of points that I just want to get some clarity on. I'm aware that there's another funding award for the same school in this financial year of 1.3 million. I think it's for the construction of upper floor resource space and 3 general classrooms. And I note that this was over £1 million. Can you confirm, was that funded through the Minor Works programme as well?
There's a broader background to that. Do you want to deal with just that very specific point?
Yes, in terms of that specific question, yes, that is funded from the EA Minor Works money. This year, for the first time, we received 2 pots of minor capital allocation, one for specifically SEN investment and one for the traditional minor other capital. This is the first year that's happened, yes. So it's funded using capital that EA has received from the department.
And it still falls under the minor works scheme?
I think in this case it falls under the SEN investment. We'd need to get clarity on that. This is the first year that the budget for minor works has been split into two by DE on its allocation to EA.
Okay. Sorry, just very quickly, that prior to 24-25 there was one minor works pot. For 24-25 onwards, and so SEN and non-SEN stuff would have been out of that pot. For 24-25, we have talked about the 29 million pot in the paper. That is the non-SEN minor works pot. In addition to that, I think it's 41 million. There's a 41 million pounds pot for SEN minor capital works.
Which is minor capital as well.
Okay, and again, this all goes back to the process as well, because it's still categorised in an EA document. It's still categorised under minor works. In fact, even the reference number on it is the same reference number or same code as would be used for minor works. So
it is a minor works project. The funding pot then, Kathy, has just changed. So as Richard said, up until this year we got a higher allocation that included, and we took out our SEN works, but they were still minor works projects. This year then we still, the SEN projects are still minor works, but there's a separate funding stream for them now the Minister has given us. So we got about 41 million this year. Okay. And that register kind of other more general minor capital works to 29 million. I think previous years it was something up around 40 or high 50s. Okay. So we actually net with more money.
Okay. Just then you mentioned that's coming out of a SEN pot. Can you clarify why that is, or what that's there for the SEN?
This is creating specialist provision at the school. There's two phases, and it hasn't been covered in this paper. I mean, I can give you a quick synopsis now. We're more than happy to provide more detail. There was two phases. It was creating a number of specialist provision classes. It's very important that those specialist provision classes are in the main body of the school, as opposed to what often happens is you can put a modular class,
which is happening in a lot of cases. Yeah.
It has, but in this case, so a couple of the mainstream classes were phase one was firstly to convert them to the specialist provision, and phase two was then to recreate that general provision elsewhere in the school. So that was the two phases to the project.
In essence, then this is to replace space that was given for specialist provision.
Yeah.
Okay, and look, you'll understand that there are other principals that are looking on in this who have put in these specialist provisions in their schools, who have given up classroom space. I can think of some of my own constituency who have given up classroom space right in the centre of their school for specialist provisions.
That's a fair, but just this was one project of 10 that were taken forward in the pilot, so this wasn't alone. And there's other specialist provision being created.
Yeah.
Hopefully as we speak too.
Yep, and I know because there's a lot of them in my constituency. So, like, it's very safe to say that nobody would begrudge any school getting money towards, especially anything that's towards specialist provisions. But you can understand other principals looking on who are in the same scenario and have given up space will be looking at quality. So what I'm just looking from you is there a promise from the EA that this is going to move forward with other in the same financial year we're talking about here? Is this something that other schools now will be looking at, knowing that they're going to get the same, they're going to get their classrooms replaced? And if so, how do you prioritise that? Which schools are getting this and when are they getting it?
So I suppose just to say absolutely. So that this has always been, I'm supposed speaking on behalf of the minor works team, I mean this is something, they know that they're borrowing people's space and they are the ones in terms of the SEN placements project, they're always saying we need to go back and pay that back. So we do have a replacement project, Kathy, but what happens, and the committee knows what happens, is that the priority becomes the year we're in, but we do have a replacement programme, and actually we'll probably be coming to the committee, I'm sure, no doubt, in future, in the next couple of months to talk about the SEN placements. And one of our challenges this year is that we made a decision, because we know we have borrowed and we're probably slow to get back to repay that actually what we're doing, the approach this year is actually we're doing the bigger scheme, because we know that, you know, we need to get back, but then the priority becomes that immediate year. So this year, and it will mean that we will have bigger projects to deliver, and it will cause problems potentially for placements around 2025, but we believe it's the right thing to do, just exactly what you're saying. So going forward, but we will go back and replace, and we have them programmed in, but we just need to get to them. But we, going forward now, any new ones, we will put in the temporary, but as part of the project, it will be the replacement piece as well.
And I accept that, Donna, but again, you know, looking out there and speaking to principals, they're now asking the questions, when will mine be replaced? If this has been replaced in the same financial year as getting a large pot of money, and that's
I think that's a really
Yeah.
fair question. I think, you know, the speed that we've put this paper together, it didn't include those components.
Mm-hmm.
What we can do is put together a paper that covers those issues and what our plan is, and then maybe come back and have a specific session with you on that component, because it is a really important point you raise.
And that's something the committee would want to take forward. So we can discuss that at the end of this session. Okay, thank you. Michelle, you had indicated next.
Okay, thank you very much for coming today. I sort of had two questions I wanted to ask on this, and I have two different ones perhaps. One, they're kind of quick ones, so hopefully you can answer them quickly. So the first one is just around, I hate going back to the pitch, but could you be specific on the nature of the health and safety risks that there was for the pitch in this Neil that made it? People were still using it, and people in the community were using it and still using it. Just what specifically tipped that into the health and safety risk?
Okay, the principal reported a number of injuries that had happened on the pitch, including quite a serious leg break and a couple of other related hospitalisations. On the back of that, they requested the health and safety team to take a look at that through the grounds maintenance service. They did that, and they identified a number of issues, including rips and tears, a poor subsurface for a very hard landing if you fell on the pitch, and a number of other issues that would indicate that the pitch had reached the end of its useful life. It was built in 2007, so it last 10, 12-ish years, thereabouts, depending on use and the maintenance regime that's put in place. So the pitch had certainly reached the end of its useful life, so it did need replaced. The injuries that had been reported certainly indicated that it was unsafe to use, but then works had to be carried out to see what we could do. So over the course of a number of years, rips and tears have been glued together, low-level maintenance carried out, nothing at all that would indicate that the pitch has actually improved in quality and moved away from being a health and safety concern. And the school have conducted their normal day-to-day risk assessments before use in the way they would any type of pitch surface or indeed any classroom setting.
People broke their leg because of the condition of the pitch. It wasn't a bad tackle or anything, and then they continued to use the pitch after that.
There was a broken bone which was put down at the time as a result of a specific issue on the pitch. Perhaps it was a tear that was then repaired locally, and it was deemed that we could continue to use it rather than take that asset completely out of use.
In terms of just the SPIMS Cafe reference, do all SPIMS get funded out of minor works?
Until this
Well,
year?
yes, they would. Yeah, it depends on the size, but the SPIMS programme has been funded out of minor works up until this year, and the department has indicated this year that it's got two separate funding streams within that minor works category. One which is earmarked for SEN work, which includes all aspects like SPIMS.
Okay. In terms of then the communication around all of this, and I know that was challenged, and you've acknowledged some of the issues in terms of the pitch being used or not being used. I think there was a question as well around, and this was acknowledged, that the information on the website was different from what the custom and practice was, if you like, that the threshold had shifted in 2017, but the website still said that it was 500,000. Was that communicated to head teachers and to schools that threshold had changed because it wasn't updated on the website? I'm assuming most people go to the website to get their information. Was there a communication out to parents in 2017 when that changed, or parents to principals when that happened?
Just before Roger, the detail, and again, I'll preface this, I haven't been through every page of our website. My understanding, the specific reference in the EA website was actually a page which was specifically focused on community use of school property. It wasn't a page that was the guidance page and trying to unpack how minor capital works deals with it. It was a passing reference to it, but in terms of the communications point.
Departmental website,
Yes,
to be clear.
Well, I'm only speaking for the EA.
Referencing the EA very clearly.
I am not aware that there was wide communication on that, but I also don't think it's relevant, because when schools come to us with a need, whether it's by application form or by identifying something through other means, they wouldn't know how much it costs. They're coming to us with a problem that they're asking EA as the managing authority for controlled sector schools to look at. So in terms of the value, I don't know if it would be relevant to say to the wider community, look, there's been a shift in this. It's absolutely good practice to get it right. I agree with that, and that did change in 2017. And
I think the short point Roger's making is we would say with a high degree of confidence that no school leader has ever said, I have a problem, but I'm not going to raise it with the EA because I think it might have crept across the £500,000 threshold that I think is in place. They would tell us they have a problem. And it's a long time from an indication of that problem before we ever start to quantify what that will be, because that requires a considerable, in terms of Lisneal, as an example, the health and safety inspection, the feasibility study, that all predated the quantification of the issue here. So that process starts.
I think it just feeds into that concern, and why this has all become an issue is that lack of understanding, transparency, or a sense of what an actual process looks like. It seems very complicated. It feels like something that is difficult for us on the outside of this system to understand. And I think it's fair that the information that's presented publicly is accurate and is consistent. And I'm just wondering what your processes are. You looking at those processes now to make sure that these things don't happen again? Because I think it was very quick for everybody to find that reference and access on the departmental website, but it builds into a lack of confidence around us. It hasn't helped the situation.
No, and I absolutely take that point, but I think it's an important point to say, and I'm not saying this to be evasive, this isn't a particularly relevant point for school leaders because they care more about the quality of their heating system and are their windows safe and secure rather than thresholds. A constant complaint I receive when I'm out at schools from school leaders is, do you have to write to us so blooming often? Yeah. There's far too much communication. So I think I would answer your point by saying we are constantly reviewing the extent and quality and accessibility of our communications. We have recently launched, for the first time, a comprehensive survey to all schools, asking them to sort of tell us more about the way we engage with them and the services we provide. We want to use that input to design how we engage in the future. So I hope that offers you some assurance. But in the past, there's a tendency for all public sector organisations to say, this is how we do business, this is how we communicate with our stakeholders, and we'll do it. What we're saying now is the dialogue with the stakeholders actually determines how we design and deliver services, and we've started that process. So I think we are in the place you've referenced.
Just one final point then around
very brief, Michelle.
The complexity of all of this. I know there's references in the audit report around estates management that reference just the complexity of this system. Based on this experience and your experience of kind of managing this process, would you agree that a single authority that looks after the estates management, rather than there being discrepancies between all these different sectors and different methodologies and all this confusion, would be a better way forward than continuing to operate these different methods?
If you forgive me, I think I'll say that's a question above my pay grade. That's one for the Minister.
You would have a view as someone who's working within the system, your experience in the system. Would it make your life easier if this was streamlined?
I'm not sure it would, because I think sometimes you can streamline things and they become too complex and too cumbersome and they become hard to manage. So I think it's an entirely legitimate question to ask, and we should robustly look at the evidence base and seek to answer it. But I wouldn't want to offer a decision and preempt a decision that's for the Department and the Minister.
Thank you. If I could just pick up on the comms point, I do think you've emphasised about the relevance of what's on your website for teachers. I appreciate teachers maybe digest this information differently than the public, but when the original story broke, the information on the departmental website around those figures caused mass confusion, and I think in fact contributed to the story running, because it felt like there was something that the EA and the department were saying different things, and I think it was that sense. So that's a question for the department, I think, at this stage, and I think one the committee may want to pick up. But getting those basic public-facing communications right is really important, because the public left the whole process with a big question mark. Why does the department not understand its own process for allocating a budget to an arm's length body of the size and level of budgetary responsibility of the EA? It was a concerning lack of understanding of their own process. But question for the department, and I take that point. Danny, you were next.
And thank you. I'm going to pick up just sort of where Pat left off, and it is around the option 2 and the option 3. I take your point that the size of the pitch and all to the handbook, but there was additional money spent because of the spectator fence, if I'm not wrong, of about £65,000.
But that was driven by the handbook requirement rather than...
Spectator fences in the handbook of the Department for Education for delivering pitches?
I can outline the 65,000 odd.
No, but that specific question there, is that in the handbook? That when you're delivering a pitch, because I know the spectator fence is needed to bring it to intermediate level. So that's a requirement that goes down from that body. So is that in the DE handbook?
The handbook defines fencing in a fairly open way, and it allows us to interpret fencing which is laid out in a robust and suitable way. So I've checked the handbook actually on this.
So it allows it to be open to interpretation, but it's not specific. So I don't have much time, so it's not specific to bring it up to IFA. And this is why transparency is very important here.
I can address that.
So you don't really need to put the spectator fence in on this project, really.
Well, I can explain the difference between option 2 and 3 quite briefly if you'd like. So £65,000 is the entirety of the difference between option 2 and option 3. And that is the essentially replace like for like, which includes dimensions that historically have been out of shape and areas of that which are out with the department's building handbook. So in terms of option 3, there's a slightly adjusted pitch proportion, and that talks about the IAFA. Yeah. The runoffs and dugouts are mentioned in the building handbook, and it talks about fencing in the building handbook. Suitable robust fencing, it's in a number of areas, and it depends on the type of synthetic pitch that you get. There are multiple choices of synthetic pitch which school leaders contribute towards depending on the type of sport that they choose to play.
Under this particular one, the 65,000 is extra for a spectator fence.
No, it's not.
So
it's
how much more money for
the £65,000, which was just a business case figure, it's less than that when it actually comes to construction, so it's not £65,000 in total. That includes, I think it's likely to be about 50-ish, that type of figure.
50,000.
But that £50,000 is for us to change what was a 2007 pitch that was not in line with the department's building handbook, to put in an adjusted pitch proportion, which actually resulted in the pitch being marginally smaller, to add in proper runoffs, to add in dugouts in line with the building handbook, and to put in fencing in line with the handbook that was not in place back in 2007.
But you don't need them extras, so what Pat was saying, and you were saying it was to the handbook.
No, but those extras are to the handbook. That is to the handbook.
Yeah, but it's them extras that doesn't really need to be a part of that.
They're to the handbook.
Because what I'm going to ask is, because transparency is very important, because is this now an opportunity that is a leg up to get an outside club then could then advance of more money? More funding?
This is nothing more.
Ready?
This is nothing more and nothing less than completing the project to the DE handbook standard. That was.
So a spectator fence that goes around.
I can only answer the questions. Yeah.
But Richard, when you have schools that have broken windows, and we had all them points,
and we fix broken windows, and we fix heating systems, and we repair leaking roofs.
You are delivering a pitch to a very high specification.
To the DE
maybe
handbook.
50,000.
I can only repeat it so many times. It's the DE handbook standard.
A spectator fence.
It's the DE handbook standard.
Dan, I would have to say, I think they has
answered. Fair enough. Then my last point would be that there's a note in here around the surface level agreement, but doesn't say what it is. Well, could we possibly get details of what that surface level agreement is?
In terms of the use of...
Is this the Maiden City?
Maiden City, because I'm guessing a pitch of that level will bring in a certain amount of revenue. I just wonder to see what that is, and possibly how that's reused for the pitch.
We can provide that, yes. That's in place, and we can certainly provide that, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Next indication was Peter.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for coming along, folks. First of all, well done for coming here and putting your hands up on the late night presser. I think that was wise. There, in my view, there has been a political and a media narrative around this particular story in Lisneal, and part of that is that someone in EA just signed a piece of paper and that was Lisneal getting the money. Was that the case? No. And if it wasn't outlined what the process was?
No, I hope we've addressed that in the paper. I'll not repeat every component of it.
Yeah, but the people won't see this, Richard, so it's worth outlining.
No, so this... The genesis of this was, new school built in 2007 with a pitch that has an expected life of 10 to 12 years. So 2007, we roll the clock forward to 2019. On the back of an injury, the principal puts his hand up, indicates he has a concern. That was the initiation of this project. As Roger says, an experienced grounds maintenance colleague went out to do health and safety, indicated the view that there was a serious problem here. We then commissioned an independent review of that, which validated that. That developed a feasibility study to look at options, a business case process that, and we set out there was three different people were involved in that. Then it goes into the budget cycle. Then there was planning permission needed for some components of it, not for the pitch surface because that planning permission had been secured originally. Finance was secured. There was a tender exercise that went through the normal approval process. Contract award subject to normal approval process. We're now in the project management phase.
Yes. I think that answers my question. It's worth outlining that to at least deal with the narrative that is out there. I only have one more question. And I'm going to direct it to you, Roger, if that's okay. How long have you been in the EA?
18 plus years.
In those 18 years, have you ever witnessed one school being subjected to the level of scrutiny that Liz Neal has been under over the last 3 weeks?
No, I haven't.
Okay. I'm not going to ask for your opinion on that because you're an official. But my view is that what has happened over the last 3 weeks with Liz Neal is not scrutiny. I believe it is an agenda driven by some in the media. I understand that some of the things that we've discussed today about the presser and some figures on websites probably didn't help much. But I would reflect that politicians shouldn't jump in when they don't necessarily understand all the details. And I think that, for example, the Belfast Telegraph, who've been running the story, 20 stories about one school in 3 weeks. A principal who's been threatened because of some of those, because of the press speculation around that, fueled by some people in politics, I think is shameful. And I would just want to reiterate, from my point of view, that Michael Allen is a brilliant principal. That all I know about Liz Neal is it's a super school. I'm sorry it's been dragged into this. And I think what everyone should reflect in is being considered and careful before you step into this territory, because behind all this there are real people, there's a real school, and I feel for that school, especially in terms of what they've been subjected to over the last 3 weeks. Chair, that's me.
Thank you, Peter. I think it's been covered in previous committee sessions on this issue. I maintain that it's legitimate for the committee to look at how public money is spent, and I think most of what's been discussed here is around how public money is spent and ensuring that's open and transparent and that accountability structures are clear. And we have had the CEO of the EA confirm today that the EA acknowledges there's a need to take this away and have a look at how these processes operate. And I think the fact that has been stated today on the record would suggest that it remains appropriate to ask questions around how public money is spent on our school estate.
Sure, I have no issue with that. However, there's ways of doing it. My point is, and what I was driving at there is there's ways of doing it, and I think that there has been narrative around this, political narrative and media narrative that has heightened the issue rather than taking the steam out of it.
I'm going to bring David in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming here today in what is no doubt a difficult briefing, not just for you, but for my colleagues who don't like to talk about Liz Neal, but we are in now to, I think, our 4th hour probably talking about Liz Neal. But that's not what they're just talking about public money, I understand, but it seems to be focused on one school. On that, could I ask you just to clarify, and I know it's within your paper, but like my colleague, I think it's worth clarifying. There's 5 other similar projects in the area that have not received similar scrutiny from politicians. Would that be right?
Just to be careful in terms of similar, I don't want similar to be interpreted as they are pitches or they're similar projects. They were projects that were a similar stage to Liz Neal that have been taken forward. I'm not sure geographically they were in the same area.
Across Northern Ireland.
But there were 5 other projects at a similar level of completion as Liz Neal.
Okay, and none of which have received, certainly not media focus, but certainly you wouldn't have received the same amount of queries around those 5 projects? No. Okay. And I think the point that you raised earlier, Richard, is a pertinent one. because at past committee sessions, members of this committee have expressed a desire to encourage physical education, outdoor play, to value that on a similar level to other forms of education. But now, when we talk about facilities that allow that to happen, there's a question whether they should be valued in the same way as other parts of our school estate. I've no doubt you'll have received representations from many parties arguing for pitches and similar facilities in different areas. Would that be right? Yeah. And can I ask, is it routine, just to address an issue that was discussed earlier in committee as well today, would it be routine whenever the Minister has visited a school, held a meeting with a school, whatever school that may be across Northern Ireland, that he would forward on some of the issues that have been raised by that school to the EA? And would that be a normal process?
Yeah.
It's not something you think has been, especially serving Lisneal more than any other school or any other sector. No, thank you very much for that as well. The other thing I would want to raise is, and I think actually one thing that has to be said, and I'm not attacking anyone here because I think actually, I don't have an expert understanding of it, but I am a sports fan and I understand that actually these pitches, there are concerned about injuries and so on with them even when they're brand new, and how that relates to a natural pitch. In that sense, certainly would it be fair to say that the likelihood of injury would go upward as it goes over its recommended usage. And this was a pitch that was 8 years, I think, over its recommended usage.
I think that would be fair to say, yes.
Yeah. So I think that it's understandable. It's a health and safety issue. Also, just to, again, clarify for members, because we have, I think it's already been clarified, actually, but I think it's been, again, used here today. IFA standard, and I think at the previous committee meeting that focused on this, we had talk of IFA standard, of UEFA standard, of all sorts of standards. I wonder that Real Madrid weren't coming over to see if the pitch was of adequate standard for themselves. But could I, just in your terms, and you've talked about the handbook, IFA standard refers to the dimensions of the pitch, essentially?
It does, yes.
And would you say that 3 and 4G pitches across Northern Ireland, depending on what level they are, the carpets are largely similar? Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
David. Cara, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here today. And I can assure you I have no want to politic on this issue. It's all strictly about process and getting clarity on some of the issues that we've been talking about over the last number of weeks here at committee. I'm really concerned about just how much this topic has perhaps damaged public confidence with the EA and with processes. And Richard, I appreciate you've mentioned about lessons learned. Can you be specific on what lessons have been learned? And I do note the public and teachers that I've spoken with would like just that bit more clarity on how, these decisions are made, the process in which they go through, and could that lesson that is being learned include more information online for people to really understand that bit more about how these decisions come to be?
Yeah, I think there's always a trade-off in terms of transparency versus information overload and putting information that's large. I mean, lots of what we lovingly refer to as our sort of governance and oversight structures are designed to send the man and woman on the street immediately to sleep because they're dull and laborious. That doesn't remove their importance, and I think we do need to find a way that people can understand how decisions about what are large sums of money by any definition are taken. We're happy to look at that and how we do it. I think I do have to say one of the lessons for us here has been, I think there's mistakes we have made along the way. One of the key mistakes we made is we didn't go out early enough with a comprehensive paper to contextualise what we were doing and how we were doing it. And I think that allowed, and it's not for me, I mean, elected representatives know this so much better than me, but once you get behind the story, it gains momentum, and oftentimes the truth is the first casualty in that. I think we didn't do enough early enough to actually explain what was happened, why it happened, when it happened. I think there are a number of misconceptions about what has happened here. I see are still appearing in the public discourse in this, and that's why my introductory comments wanted to deal with those 4 points. So the lessons for us are, explain this, but I wouldn't want to rely on the fact that we explain our decision-making process on an EA website as being enough when there is an issue of concern about an individual project. I think we still need to come out early and give a comprehensive articulation of that. So I think the big lesson that is, but as I said against that, as my comms people always say to me, when you're explaining, you're losing. We need to find a way to get out ahead of that and make sure people understand what's happening and when. I would also say that the heavy lifting in this is done by the scrutiny and oversight that's done to us by both our own board and our sponsor department, and indeed scrutiny by the audit office and my own role as accounting officer, and the fact that I'm accountable through the Public Accounts Committee and the Assembly. So there are many components to that. It is difficult to explain all that in an accessible way to the public, but again, it's a very fair point.
No, I think you're right. I think there's opportunities there to use sort of simplistic messaging like infographics, simple videos, things like that. And I think that will take away from something there's a bit of a mystery around this funding. And I think really clear strategic communication with the public and with schools would be beneficial to refute that. Another member had made a comment. There's been around 20 stories about this school. For example, we've learned recently over the past sort of 24 hours about the 1.3 million investment. Do you think it was wrong that the minister didn't allude to that funding? And I think that there's other members have made comments, this feels like it's being sensationalised. But do you think that perhaps the minister not mentioning this previously has kind of fed into that? Do you think that that's problematic, or that it should have been raised with us at a committee level? Or do you have a personal comment on that?
If you forgive me, I think can I sidestep offering any critique or assessment of a minister? I think. I think it's of fundamental importance that when any of us come to committees, we answer the questions that are put to us. But in terms of how that's done and when it's done, if you don't mind, I'm going to leave that for others to comment on.
I'll respect your position. It's just, I think when we had the minister at committee, for me, understanding that initially the decision was made that this was an immediate health and safety risk, and then when the EA had come out to correct that, that's where I think the public are gaining a sense of confusion around this school. But no, I'll respect your position. And just lastly then, is there anything the committee should know today about this school, or any funding that we don't already know about and should?
There's certainly nothing I'm aware of that hasn't been.
No,
as I say, and it's not a caveat to that. I think we've said we will develop a broader paper to talk about the SEN issues, which may bring a bit more detail to what's already known, but it's not that there's a revelation that we're holding back.
Okay, no, I'm content. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Cara, and thank you all for your time today. Again,
could I ask for clarification?
If it's for clarity,
just a short
yes.
question. In terms of lost space that was used for setting up SPIMS, the replacement funding, does that come from the SEN budget or the minor works budget?
All from the SEN.
It's all part of the one project in a number of phases.
We can check that, we think the answer is it's all from the SEN one, but we'll check that and confirm definitively for you. Chair, could I just add one point? It's just in terms of, it's really important for me, our relationship with the committee. I'm not commenting about anything that happens outside this room, but just to say to committee members today, from our perspective, when we come here, we expect to get hard questions and to be challenged. And that's exactly what's happened today. It's right that it happens.
As Roy King would say, that's our job.
No, and you do it very well. But I just want to say, from our perspective, we're very comfortable. We expect to come here and to receive the sorts of questions and challenge that we've got, and we'll do so again. We may not always agree, but we're happy to do that and to come along for that, and that's a core part of our job.
That is very much appreciated. And I was going to just say, but just before the Deputy Chair came in then, on that point of clarification, the committee appreciates you giving up your time to come here because it was done at short notice, but it is, and I maintain, as said earlier in the session, that it is always appropriate to ask how public money is being spent, and I think any suggestion otherwise seems very odd to me in a committee doing the work that it's supposed to do. But we do thank you for your time. I would ask that, and I think we'll get agreement, but I think that further paper that you referenced to provide some clarity around that SEN minor works budget and how that has been rolled out would be very helpful. So thank you.
You guys.
Okay. So just while witnesses are making their way out, thank members for their patience. It's been a long evidence session today. We have that point of clarity around the SEN minor works budget and perhaps the opportunity for a further paper on that for members, which I think if we can agree that we just confirm in writing that we want to seek that clarity. Are there any other actions arising from that at this stage? Just to note, we do have the department in next week providing a capital briefing. So if we have an interest in minor works and how that is spent on the departmental side, with looking after maintained and GMI schools, then that would be our opportunity to do that. So is there anything else, Danny?
I would like to know, and it's not about picking on the school, it's just a specification around a pitch. Like £50,000 is a lot of money. For the spectator fence, and that is needed for that IFA level. So I would just like to know how many other schools have had that delivered with their pitches. If it's in the handbook, they made it sound like it's standard practice. I'm not so sure about that.
Well, I think we can certainly ask that if members are agreed. I mean, I think they were very clear in that point that it was in the DA handbook, so I think maybe even to be provided with a copy of that relevant section, and I think to get a sense, because again, members are at pains to say no one's an issue, no one's any interest in picking out an individual school. It just has happened that the story has come to light through the lens of one school. I think to get a sense of how many schools in the mix are getting that funding is appropriate to ask.
I suppose the issue, Chair, is whether it's in the handbook or not is, to all intents and purposes, irrelevant, because what could have happened here was that the surface of that pitch was replaced, and given we're operating in such tight financial circumstances, one would think the EA and the department would be trying to spread the funding around as much as possible, given that there are other cases, and you've outlined some of them yourself, the water pouring through the ceiling. And now we see there's actually 2 million gone into Lisneal over this financial year, and you just wonder, well, why go for the gold standard? Why not, trim it back a bit, and then there's an extra 50 grand for somewhere else?
Is that perhaps to maybe, and I'll maybe try and preempt comments on this side to me in terms of to look at an appropriate action on this. I mean, in terms of my earlier questions around the prioritisation, there was an undertaking, as far as I could take it from the EA, that they were going to undertake a review of this. I mean, would be seeking a clear written briefing on the scope of that review, of how all of these projects are prioritised, in terms of what goes into the priority one pot and what does not. Is that a satisfactory action to try and establish, where we go from here in terms of how we actually take the learning from this scenario and ensure that there is a more appropriate and a transparent accountability around this? Is that something members would be comfortable with?
Of the review?
I think to understand what's the scope of that, what are they actually going to look at, and I would suggest we ask the same questions of the department on their side next week. David?
Sure, I've no objection to asking those questions. For what it's worth, I think there's actually, and I'm not going to put my neck on it, but I think there is hockey pitches and so on that have fence and so on that maybe were built before and so on.
I'm pretty sure there are, yes.
But I do have to note, I think, that we've rolled back from looking at the pitch and accusations made about the pitch and the overall project and so on to now focusing on a £50,000 fence, allegedly, and whether the focus on Lisneal has been proportionate to the issues raised, and whether the focus specifically on Lisneal rather than other schools has been proportionate. I think the witnesses today, I think, showed remarkable candour and willingness to put their hands up and say when they were wrong. I think an action point for some may be to reflect on what they have said and whether they should do the same.
It's not, sorry, it's not allegedly, sorry, the 50,000, I'm actually trying to take it away from it. What I'm saying is, if that's in the handbook, that's grand, but how many pitches have been delivered with that takes it away from it. That's what's in. It's not allegedly the official said
I
it.
actually understand that point. I just think that it's worth noting that we have come a long way from where we started in terms of now where we're focusing on the and we talked about different standards of carpets and pitches and so on, and now we're at the fence. And I accept your point.
But
on
I
the fence.
actually asked the minister that was my one question. I was trying to get that to him, and he wouldn't answer me. In fact, it was the minister who called me sectarian for wanting to ask that question. That's all.
Come in to just try and maybe draw a line under this.
Could I
very brief point? But
okay,
just
one point. I mean, look,
we do need
because
to draw a line.
it's fine, Chair.
Come to what we agree on. But I've brought other members in on to hear your
No, I appreciate that, Chair, and thank you for your indulgence. Look, it's just to pick up on what Pat said there about this additional 1.3, which is brought up today a couple of times. I mean, my understanding of this, and even the Telegraph reflected on this. I mean, this is for autism. The spend here is to replace classrooms that have been repurposed for autistic kids in Lisneal, and part of the objectives that the committee has established is supporting SEN. So this 1.3, I don't think it should be brought into it. I think that 1.3, and you can do your own research. This is for specialist autism services in Lisneal. It's SEN. The spend, and they reflected on some of this today, is to replace classrooms that are now have been purposed for this. And I don't think we should draw it in. I think it's shameful that the Telegraph went with that sort of line on it. But I'm not going to speak for them. But I'm just saying I think we want to avoid that, because I think, and your colleague mentioned it in passing during the committee, it is something that we should actually think this is great. There are special need kids in Lisneal with autism who are being supported. And that's where that spend's coming from.
No member's going to object to spend on SEN provision, and I've seen your indication, Cara. I'll come in and bring you in 1 second. My point to that is that the officials offered a further clarification around how minor works for the regular pot and for SEN are divided
up. Fine with that, Chair. No problem.
And at times seemed a little unsure themselves how it was divided up. So I think, again, in the interest of just proper transparency around
scrutiny, I'm happy enough with that. That's the procedure.
If this has shown anything, it is that we are not quite sure how minor works budgets are divvied out, and I put that on the departmental side as well, which we can raise next week. Karen?
Yeah, just a very quick point, just to repeat the point you made there, Chair. I think sometimes it's simple things like what's on a website. If we want to be an effective committee and we want to scrutinise how things are being done, if the basic information is wrong about caps on budgets, we can't do our job effectively. It undermines public trust, and it doesn't allow us to be as effective as possible. So I think there is a piece there to just maybe all departments we need to look at, is the public information that we're able to access, that the public is able to access, is it up to date? Is it correct? And if it's not, that doesn't serve anybody.
I think that's a very, very helpful note to close on. So I don't think there's anything that's been proposed that anybody is disagreeing on. There may be disagreements on emphasis and approach, and that we can all live with that. Okay, so we'll move on then to get through the last bits of business as quickly as we can. Item 9 is correspondence. That's pages 337 to 632 of your packs, and then just a couple of items in it, tabled papers there, pages 88 and 89. Summary notes at page 337. As usual, I'll just go through anything that has that requires an action. I'm just going to ask, for, in the interest of time, there are 2 or 3 that came in providing information around RSE. Are we all content to just assume that those are fed into the inquiry materials? Are we agreed? Okay, that's fine. Move on to item 9.5, page 347. It's correspondence from Marie Curie providing views on the Minister of Education's response on the bereavement policy and support for schools, which we had shared with them. Are we content that we forward Marie Curie's response to the department for their feedback? Great. We have item 9.7, correspondence from Women's Aid Federation providing an evaluation of the Helping Hands and Social Guardian training report, and apologies, that's RSE related as well, so again members have agreed that can feed into the inquiry. Item 9.8, page 418, it's correspondence from an organisation, Outscape, providing a guide on the future of outdoor recreation in 7 Irish counties, along with details of their conference. I would propose that we note the conference date for diaries, if members are agreed.
Great.
Item 9.9, page 423, is a response from the Department of Education providing an update on the data collected by the department in relation to the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act. So really just want to very briefly seek members' views on the response. I'll maybe get ahead of it by saying I think we have already suggested we seek a briefing on post-legislative scrutiny of that particular act via the Bills Office, and I'm hoping that is progressing. But if just to open it up, as I know it's an issue we have discussed in committee, if any other members want to come in. Michelle was looking to come in.
Agree. I think a briefing would be helpful, and that could include just some information on best practice from other areas would be helpful as well.
Be great. So just to check through yourself, Clark.
Best practice in post-legislative scrutiny, is
no,
it?
in bullying, best practice within schools in terms of dealing with the issue of bullying within schools.
From Assembly Research then?
No, I'm talking about a briefing from the team.
When the department come in to brief us, if they can, I'm assuming part of the post-legislative scrutiny.
Between researchers at the moment.
Yes, no, I understand, no.
Okay, sure.
I think if the department can speak to maybe what is identified as best practice elsewhere.
Thanks so much.
Okay, are we all agreed on that? Great. Item 9.10, page 425, that's correspondence from the chair of the management side on the offer for teachers' pay 24-25. I would propose that we, my sense is that negotiations are maybe at a fairly sort of a sensitive stage here, and whether any people are around the table or not, I'm not sure. So I'm not sure we'll get anyone in for a formal briefing at this stage, if that's tenable. But I would want to propose we write back to the management side and ask them just for a clear written update on what engagement is actually underway here, and when are the relevant parties going to be around the table again, because I think we're all agreed, whatever our nuances might be on it, that they need to find a resolution to this. So are we agreed on that? Agreed. Item 9.11, page 427, correspondence from the Committee for Finance regarding concerns about Nick's sickness absence levels. Would members agree we write to the department asking what action specifically is being taken within DE around tackling sickness absence levels among staff? Agreed. Item 9.14, it is correspondence from Messy Play NI regarding additional investment for transforming outdoor play in schools. I would propose that we note. Are members agreed? Item 9.16, page 563, is a written briefing paper from Rebecca Davis on air quality in schools. I would suggest at this stage, if committee's agreed, that we go back and thank the individual for sending that additional briefing in, but my understanding is we are awaiting further correspondence from the department back on air quality issues, and I think before we maybe take on board that the content of that full report, that we await the return of the DE correspondence. Are we agreed? Item 9.19, correspondence from the Department of Education providing an update on engagement with stakeholders on transforming youth work, and it came on the back of a briefing we received from the Accord Collective and the Youth Work Alliance on this. So I would want to suggest we share that with those stakeholders and seek their feedback, but also that we write back to the department, because they indicated that some sort of policy development work is going on, but there was very little to no detail on that. So I would like to suggest that we get more detail substantively on the detail of the timescales for that policy development work, at the scope of that policy work, and clear information about who they are now engaging with. Are members agreed? Danny, did you want to?
Yeah, no, it's very important, because you heard that from the presentation earlier on, how the pivotal role that our youth workers are playing, and breaking down actually the areas as well where it'd be good, where maybe better practice not elsewhere, but there's still that concern around the specifications and when they're written up, especially for the community and voluntary sector of it, and that insecurity that goes with it. So it needs. Yeah,
I think that I can sort of say in advance, I'm pretty sure it will be a disappointing response for that collective who presented to us, and I think actually it's been a long job of work to get all of those organisations on board with a single agreed approach on how this should be taken forward, and I think it's regrettable rather than that being received with open arms. It seems to have been would like to keep our distance from the department, so I do think we should seek their feedback, and again, if as members have agreed that we get the update on the policy, because I wouldn't want that to be kicked into the long grass. The presentation we received was quite clear this was urgent, so that is fine. So then item 9.2, page 622, is a response from the EA providing information on a range of matters. It's quite a long piece of correspondence, but I wanted just to suggest a couple of things that appeared to me as being relevant. One was early years inclusion service. There's quite a lot of information on that. And it seems clear to me that the non-statutory preschool providers are not on an equal footing here. They can't access that same referral process that the statutory settings can, and my concern is that is there a possibility that children, just by virtue of the setting they're in, are not going to access the same support that children in a statutory setting would? So I would like to suggest we write to the EA to ask if they can provide more clarity on how they can give us confidence that those non-statutory setting, the children in those settings are going to get the same service. Are members agreed? There was also the issue that they raised around a significant lack of funding to actually roll out early years local impact teams. So I would suggest we write to the department to ask what their funding plans are for those teams. Members are agreed.
Right.
Item 9.22, page 632, is a response from the Department of Education confirming it intends to involve the Women's Aid Federation in the ongoing engagement on the early learning and childcare strategy. So I would propose we share that with the Women's Aid Federation for their feedback, but I would suggest we do note positively that committee request that they have now been engaged in that process by the department, which I think is a positive outcome if members are agreed.
Agreed.
We have in table papers there a further piece of correspondence on listening and minor works from an individual. Given the extent to which that's been covered in the evidence session today, I would propose that we note, if members are agreed.
Right.
And item 9.24 is really a note for diaries. It's for Northern Ireland Youth Forum event. There's a wee bit of lack of clarity around the exact date that it's taking place, which we may need to seek just confirmation of, but I'm unable to attend as chair on that date, so it's really just to make members aware of that, and there's a contact there if they want to reach out and are interested in attending. It looks like a really a good event around sort of democratic participation among young people, so it would be a good one for members to get to. Other than those items, are we content to dispose of correspondence as per the summary note at page 337? We agreed?
Right.
And then that takes us to forward work programme, which I know we're not going to have a chance to speak to in any detail. The clerk is desperate to get in a couple of things, so things may be moving, so I'll just bring the clerk in at this stage.
Okay, so we're having the school uniform bill kicking off next week in the Chamber, and the bill office come in to give you a legislative briefing before the bill team arrives. So on that basis, the Controlled Schools Sector Task Force have just agreed that they will come a little bit later on they're checking diaries for the 2nd and 9th of April, so that we can have the bill office next week and then the departmental team on the bill. Then just also for your information, on the 12th of March there's an integrated education theme to have IAF and NICE and the department in the main meeting. We are scheduling integrated alumni at lunchtime, and we will provide a lunch, so that would be 12:30 to 1:30. Can you put that in your diaries? Does that sound okay? Then the concurrent meeting with economy, which is lined up already with the economy committee, that is, we were going to have an oral briefing on 14 to 19 strategy coming up, and officials have said, won't we just do that with the concurrent meeting instead? So we're going to get the written material beforehand, so that you're still cited on the material before you go into the concurrent meeting. Dr. Colin Knox, before he took a leave of absence, made recommendations for travel. He came up with 2 destinations that combine the priorities of SEN and underachievement. And so we haven't given you that, and I'll provide that to you maybe in next week's pack. We might have time to discuss it. So they would be Estonia and the Netherlands. And it is possible as an outside eventuality that you might go with another committee who are going to Estonia, but that's down the line.
Whenever you said direction of travel on SEN and so forth, I was really interested because I thought Colin's done such good work. What is his suggestions in terms of the general direction of travel on SEN, as opposed to us going somewhere? Again, maybe lost in translation.
Discussion for another time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the outdoor education event is looming quite soon, actually, and the committee initially undertook to do that when it was doing its strategic planning down at the Forest School. Having had some discussions, that the idea that the Forest School would be interested in is that maybe the committee will consider at a stakeholder event, several topics relating to outdoor education, and then on the back of that, perhaps take a motion to the Chamber looking for a strategy that might have those features in it. So can you please send me any recommended stakeholders that you would want to be included in that, who've got an interest in outdoor education, be it play or SEN, nurture, or just different aspects of using the outdoors for curriculum delivery. And then the school uniform bill, we will have a timeline for you after some consultation behind the scenes with the bill office about just how long the committee stage might take. So that's all I'll say.
Okay. No, thank you. No, that's all really helpful. And thank you for that. And with that in mind, are we agreed to endorse the draft forward work programme? Agreed. Item 11, any other business? No. I'm going to quickly say no. Item 12, date, time and place of next meeting. So that is Wednesday the 5th of March, 2 p.m, room 29, Parliament Buildings. And that leaves me to put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Committee Room 29, sound. Committee Room 29.